Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto had to marry Tsunade because of a truce. The Uchihas have a history of madness, and no one knew it better than Naruto, fifth son of Tajima Uchiha. Amidst his father's mad ambition and his eldest brother Madara's thirst for revenge against the Senju and the entire world, it will take every ounce of Naruto's charm and skill at arms to save the greatest clan of the ninja world, and it still might not be enough. Welcome aboard! Chapter 23. The White Wedding. Tajima and Naori peacefully ate their breakfast while watching the two young men before them nursing their heads quite painfully. It was quite hard for the two older Uchiha to see these two as men, for in their eyes they were still young boys whom they had watched grow over the years. Today was going to be a historic day for their family and they needed the boys at their best behavior, but for now both brother and sister couldn't help but enjoy Naruto and Madara's suffering. "How much did you two idiots drink?" asked Tajima amusedly, and watched Naruto glare at Madara. "More than I'd like," muttered the new king sourly, earning a snort from Madara. "I organized a party for you because after today you're going to be bound to that woman. I don't regret making you have the best time of your life," replied Madara without remorse, even as he groaned from his hangover. "She's not that bad, brother. Maybe you should give her a chance," urged Naruto tiredly. HN. Naori could not help but smile at the fact that Naruto at least respected his future wife, if not love her outright. But at the same time, he also knew Madara was still sour with the Senjus and it was best if he was not pushed any further. He had already sacrificed his revenge for Naruto, which was more than Naruto could ever ask from the older boy. But she also didn't miss the fact that her favorite nephew, aside from his painful hangover, looked quite nervous. And she had a feeling why. Just when she was about to speak, her brother cut her off. "Am I to believe that you do know what happens on wedding night, Naruto?" Madara spewed the lemon juice he was drinking all over the table before bursting out loud laughing, while his younger brother blushed crimson and grabbed his forehead in agony and humiliation. "Naruto," snapped Tajima, and smirked when his son raised a patronizing hand. "I am aware of the procedure," muttered Naruto. "I'd say," teased Madara, earning a sharp glance from Naruto, but was relieved when Madara gave him a reassuring nod. "Good. I cannot afford for you to shame the Uchiha name in the marriage bed, and now is your chance to clear away any doubts." "Theory is quite different than the real thing," boy advised Tajima seriously. "You would know, wouldn't you, father?" grinned Madara. It was one of the rare times Tajima was left speechless and gaped at what Madara just said. Naori chuckled loudly at her brother's stupefied expression before giving an approving grin to Madara, who returned the gesture. "Not so loud," muttered Naruto painfully. "Oh, shut up, you baby," chastised Madara, before playfully smacking Naruto on the head, making the younger boy groan in even more pain. Madara's moment of victory didn't last long when he noticed his father gaining a cold smirk on his lips. He knew better than most what that gesture meant. "Madara, since you're so cheery today, I'd like you to oversee the final decorations of the royal castle. Coordinate with the Yamanaka and make sure all the flowers are in place." Naori howled in laughter when Madara cried out in horror and even pleaded with his father to make him not do that dreadful work. Unfortunately for the wild dragon, his brother had similar thoughts. "The king insists," said Naruto with a savage grin. "Fuck you, cursed Madara." "Care to repeat that again?" asked Tajima a little too calmly, making Madara gulp and lower his head in defeat. Naruto could not help but smile as he watched his family sit together and enjoy for the first time in years. Such a phenomenon would never have happened if the war had gone on. But most of all, he knew these three had given up a lot for him. "I am glad you are all here today," said Naruto honestly with a smile. "Wouldn't be good if I miss your wedding with the Senju," mocked Madara, but the smile on his lips was enough to show Naruto that despite his reservations about this union, Madara would have his back just as he always had. The king got up from his seat and approached the eldest members of their family. Despite his painful headache, he knelt before them and took each of their hands in his own. He could only imagine what kind of tragedies these two had borne together. The death of Naruto's own brothers haunted him to this day. But these two had watched so many of their siblings be torn apart in ways worse than Naruto's brothers ever had. They watched their parents die painful and miserable deaths, their people almost fall apart. Yet both Tajima and Naori, despite their pain and hatred, had given up everything for him. Words would never suffice how indebted he was to these two, but he felt he had to do this regardless. "Thank you," said Naruto sincerely. Naori cupped his cheek and placed a warm kiss on his forehead before looking into his eyes. I wish you all the happiness in the world, Naruto. I hope you find the peace you deserve with Tsunade, said Naori happily. Taijima merely placed his other hand on Naruto's shoulder and looked at his son with a firm but proud gaze. Uchiha are loyal to their own. The Uzumaki are not the only ones who value family above all else, answered Taijima frankly. I understand, replied Naruto with a smile, earning a nod from Taijima as the older man adopted a distant gaze in his eyes. I just wish your brothers could be here today, whispered Taijima sadly. Both Naruto and Madara were shocked on hearing what their father just said. Never once had Taijima talked about his dead sons to anyone, much less his own family, except for Naori. However, the unending sorrow that the man had kept at bay for years was finally visible for his sons to see. Taijima gave a weak smile and Naruto was stunned to see his father's eyes were moist. Before he could say anything, Taijima got up from his chair and hurriedly walked out of the room. Naori was about to follow her brother, but Madara gave her a reassuring nod before running after his father. Her gaze then turned to Naruto and the emotion in his eyes was clear for her to see. Guilt. Does this pain ever go away? Whispered Naruto, looking at this woman who could understand his suffering better than most people ever could. No, answered Naori gently but honestly. I often dream of them. Of what they would think of me now. Izuna had always loved me, Yashiro and Inabi were distant, confessed Naruto sadly. They were boys, Naruto. They didn't understand, consoled Naori, as she caressed his hair, making him chuckle humorlessly. They were mean to me most of the time. I'd call them twin demons, but those same brothers nearly pummeled other boys to death when few of them tried to take my baby dragon toy from me. I asked them if I'd ever see a true dragon in my life. They laughed at me and said dragons don't exist anymore. When I started crying, Yashiro bonked me on the head and smirked before pointing at himself and calling himself a dragon. Inabi did the same. They had such stupid grins on their faces which made me laugh. They were angry and sad because mother died giving birth to me, but they did love me, Naori. I know that now. I swear, I'll go to my grave thinking about the stupid grins on their faces and their god-awful howls as they tried to imitate a dragon's roar, whispered Naruto with a wistful smile. She embraced him in her arms and felt him shudder for a few moments before he managed to regain control over himself. Naori knew better than most what pain their family had endured, and yet Naruto had found it in his heart to forgive the Senjus. It could be said both Uchiha and Senju had murdered each other in equal measures, but to her their family was not just murdered but butchered in very cruel ways. The faces of her own lost siblings flashed before her eyes, followed by the faces of the various clan heads that now infested Naruto's court. Those men and women had also their own pains and grievances. All it would take to shatter this peace was Naruto's death. If such a horror happened, Madara and Taijima would wage war and kill every last one of those traitors before getting killed themselves. Naruto had a good heart, but Taijima and Madara were both going away. Madara was going to focus on the upcoming war against the other nations while also building the ninja village. Taijima, on the other hand, would be focused on maintaining peace in their own nation while also governing the Uchiha clan. That left Naruto alone in the midst of these former enemies. None of them would dare attack him openly or risk being butchered by the fox, but ninjas had other subtle ways of making their enemies go away. She looked at this boy who was her son in all but name, and the thought of seeing his cold corpse would break her completely. Her decision was made. I'm staying here with you, said Naori fiercely, making him look up at her. The clan dash can survive under Taijima. I'm not leaving you alone here in the midst of these snakes, said Naori seriously, her tone leaving no scope for opposition, but it only made Naruto smile. I can live with that, said Naruto cheekily, making her smirk. You better. Naruto and Madara both observed the finely decorated capital before them. There were still traces of the battle that was fought here not so long ago, but with the help of the ninja clans, much of the damage had been repaired. The residents of the capital were initially hostile to the new regime until Naruto, despite the warnings of his advisors, marched out and interacted personally with the people, a phenomenon that had not happened in nearly a century, with the previous daimyos considering it beneath them to personally visit their subjects. Madara had watched his youngest brother patiently listen to the people and their grievances. He immediately punished the few former royal guards still alive who had terrorized the civilians, imprisoned the corrupt officials. With winter coming, the citizens requested more food, work, and coin for their families. A demand which the king promised to fulfill with his first act, giving a considerable sum of the crownlands for civilians to grow farms upon, build houses and claim some lands for themselves. The kindness didn't go unnoticed, and now the tales of Naruto the Good were spreading like a raging fire throughout the land of fire. To add further to the joy of the civilians, their king had organized a grand festival for them on the occasion of his marriage. Tonight, these poor and impoverished families would eat a feast they could have never imagined in their wildest dreams. They would get to share some good wine and be happy with their friends and loved ones. At first, Madara thought his brother to be more than lenient with people whom ninjas could pacify very easily. But as each day passed, he watched his brother's popularity grow to the point that now if anyone tried to take this city from Naruto, they would have to go through thousands of civilians loyal to their king. But right now the same king looked nervous. "What is it?" inquired Madara with a raised eyebrow. "I don't know if I can be the husband Tsunade wants me to be," confessed Naruto, making his brother snort in disbelief. "Trust me. If the Senju cannot see your worth, then she's stupid. You're more than what she deserves," assured Madara confidently. "I don't know, brother. If she ever finds out about my unborn daughters?" whispered Naruto, his fear over that possibility clear for Madara to see. "We'll deal with it when we get there. But if it gives you peace, I've already assigned 100 of my best men near the temple. If anyone tries to harm my nieces, they'll have to go through those 100 Uchiha first, and I won't be far away. I won't let anything happen to them," Naruto promised Madara fiercely, earning a smile from the king. "Thank you, truly. But I need another favor," said Naruto hesitantly. "Careful, brother. You owe me quite a lot already," japed Madara, earning a nod from his youngest brother. "I know. And whenever you need me, I will be there for you," promised Naruto sincerely. "I'll hold you to it," replied Madara seriously, before continuing with a smile. "Good. Now tell me what you need." Madara listened as Naruto explained to him of the fact that Makoto was leaving the Kinsguard. He didn't have to be a genius to see his brother had great affection for the woman and was now worried about her future. When Naruto told him about her fighting skills, Madara was quite impressed. But he soon frowned when Naruto told him about her origin of being a servant's daughter and how many would try to take advantage of her now that she was not under his protection. "I'm thinking of forming a small elite force loyal to me. Considering her experience and recommendation, I'll see her worth, and if she proves herself, then she can command men sworn to defend me. Not that I need it," said Madara honestly with a wink. "I owe you one," said Naruto happily, earning a light bop on the head. "More than one." Naruto wryly smiled at that statement, knowing it was true. Still another concern crossed his mind, and only his brother had the answer to that problem. "Is father okay?" asked Naruto worriedly, earning a grim nod from Madara. "The old man more tougher than the both of us combined." "He'll be fine," assured Madara, and didn't miss his brother sighing in relief. Without hesitation, he placed a hand on the nervous boy's shoulder. "This is your day, Naruto. And your family will be there for you, so cheer up and enjoy," encouraged Madara. Naruto could not help but smile. Winter was coming along very fast, and as a result the royal gardens that would be the place of the historic marriage were now sporting a few layers of snow here and there. Naruto wagered that it would turn to muddy slush by the end of the day, and he had instructed a group of servants to clear a path through the courtyard to the gardens. He was walking along that cleared path now, pleased to see that they had done a good job. It was not himself he was concerned with, it was Tsunade. He knew how much importance she gave to her appearance, which had greatly increased now that she was to be queen, and he imagined she would be upset if the bottom of her wedding dress was soaked through and stained with mud and snow by the time she reached the gardens. Though he thought it likely that she would inevitably damage the bottom of it, he was hopeful that it would not be as bad now that she had a clear walkway. It would not be long. Soon she would be making her own way to the gardens. The thought of it had his hands coming to rearrange his clothes nervously. He declined the urge to look back at Madara, who was walking behind him carrying the cloak bearing the roaring red-colored three-headed dragon on a background of black silk, the new sigil of his future family that elevated them above the Uchiha clan. Many of his bannermen had made the effort to join the wedding. He had been expecting many to decline, and he was not offended when a few like the Shamura, Inuzuka and Yamanaka declined, and it was for the best considering this peace was still hard for those clans to accept. He only hoped that Tsunade would not be offended. Besides, every ninja lord would all have to meet her at the first gathering of the Royal Council tomorrow after the wedding, where he would formally announce the War of Conquest, and Naruto was confident that Tsunade would be able to make a good impression then. He had been unable to help liking her as days passed and started to enjoy her company. She was not a senju to him in anything but looks, and that he was more than happy to live with. He did wish they did not have to get up and leave in the morning after their wedding though, to start a war and crush the remaining daimyo loyalists. Once upon a time he imagined he would relish any chance he had to be away from her. Not now though. Now he looked forward to spending time with her and enjoying her company. Their strolls around the gardens had slowly become his favorite part of the day. He smiled wryly, knowing that when the snows fell thicker, they would no longer be able to participate in that particular pastime. They had learned a lot about each other in the past week. Tsunade had taken upon herself to participate vigorously in the wedding preparations while he sorted out the royal court. In that time, he got to know she liked gambling, drinking, dancing, riding horses, as well as katsuyu and sparring. She was no delicate flower and was a warrior through and through, a fact which she respected and admired. But there was also compassion in her heart, which she brilliantly showed when she recommended him to offer the daimyo's prisoner daughters and wife to either join the Nadeshia clan as priestesses for the rest of their life or choose to marry any minor ninja lord of Naruto's choosing. Unsurprisingly, the entire family chose the option to live free than be saddled with men who overthrew their husband/father. When that was done, Naruto swiftly executed the daimyo. Tsunade had been there and was surprised when Naruto carried out the sentence himself, unlike her brothers who always executed traitors and criminals with the help of special jailers. At the same time, Tsunade also pleasantly discovered that unlike most rumors that claimed Naruto to be a savage monster, he actually enjoyed reading stories on occasion and listened to bards. He was a pretty decent player of the flute and had made her cry with one of his songs. He also enjoyed spending time with his subjects and often made it a habit to visit them every day to interact with them personally. For the ninja lords he was the Dragon King, but for the common folk he was Naruto the Good. He also liked eating new foods but was terrible at drinking, a fact for which she teased him endlessly, much to his embarrassment. Naruto tore his mind from those thoughts as he finally entered the gardens, noting that all those attending were already present, besides Tsunade and her brothers of course. He strode towards the holy tree to take his place, seeing his family lined up nearby as he came to a halt. His heart panged dully for those he was missing. 3 of his brothers who should be here were not there, and words couldn't describe how badly he wished Izuna was here on this important day. His only solace was the fact that he had Madara right by his side, giving him a reassuring smile which made his sadness vanish. He was glad to see his childhood friends were all there except for Makoto, but he understood why she chose to skip this event. Unlike the ninja clan heads who chose not to come to this event due to old grudges and wounded pride, Makoto had a valid reason to avoid watching him be promised to another woman for the rest of his life. Naruto scanned his family again, noting for the first time that his father was not clad in black. It was the first time he had seen him in anything that resembled color in so many years, and he was touched that he had managed it for his wedding. Even in his simple but elegant blue-colored shirt with the Uchiha crest on his back along with simple black pants and sandals, Taijima Uchiha cut a striking figure. Unlike the Senjus, the Uchihas were never one for extravagance, and Taijima was the living definition of that philosophy. Naori on the other hand had decided to skip that tradition, and Naruto could not help but notice how stunning she looked, a fact which was clear to see as many ninja lords, despite being married, were silently staring at her form. Naori was wearing a blue dress, albeit a rather dark shade of blue, beneath a gray cloak. He sent her a small smile and she returned it, inclining her head slightly. Before he could finish looking at the other guests, he heard stunned gasps and was forced to turn towards the source that evoked such a reaction. He froze. Blasting the tradition of choosing one family member as escort, Tsunade had chosen to have all 3 of her brothers walk by her side as she entered the royal gardens. Her dress was as white as the untouched snow around the pool of the gardens. Even from a distance he could see that the bodice was sewn with pearls and silver and golden thread. Pearls were woven into her hair as well, which was half braided back from her face to allow her golden curls to tumble down her back. Around her shoulders was a black cloak made of fine velvet, and Naruto imagined that the roaring antler of the Senju would be woven into the back of it. He swallowed hard as she and her brothers came to a halt on the opposite side of the pool to him. Everyone in the gardens seemed to have turned to stare at her, and he vaguely wondered if she looked as enchanting to them as she did to him. He had always known she was beautiful, it seemed only now he was appreciating just how captivating she really was. He took a deep breath, knowing that this was it. He could not allow the silence to continue much longer. Thankfully, the Senjus had reluctantly agreed to carry out the marriage in the old ways followed by the Uchiha. It was a good decision because Taijima would never allow any of his sons to be married in a temple of gods whom he considered false and blasphemous. At the same time, the Senjus had made clear they would not appreciate to marry their only princess in front of the old gods of the Uchiha. It was another one of the cultural differences between the two former enemies, despite the fact that they were once a part of the same family. In the end, a compromise was made when Naruto suggested the marriage take place in the royal garden under a simple holy tree with the blessings of a priest who knew enough about both religions. It would seem this union was going to set a lot of new rituals and send cultural shocks throughout the elemental nations, if it had not already done so. A fact which made Naruto smirk internally before he was brought out of his thoughts by Madara's loud voice. Who comes? Who comes before the gods? Madara asked clearly. Naruto's eyes stayed on Tsunade, who smiled at him, as her eldest brother answered the question. Tsunade, of the Senju clan, comes here to be Wednesday, Hashirama announced proudly with a beaming smile. It was her second brother who followed the ritual, although his ice-cold eyes seemed to bore into Naruto's very soul and his clenched fists was enough to show how much he hated this. She comes to claim the blessings of the gods. Who comes to claim her? Tobirama asked coldly. Me, Naruto said firmly, determined to show the white-haired Senju he was not intimidated by him in the slightest, that his opinion did not matter to him. That he was glad to marry Tsunade, regardless of Tobirama's bitter feelings. Naruto, of the Uchiha clan, he continued clearly, the Dragon King and rightful ruler of the elemental nations. I claim her. Who gives her? He asked, finally moving his eyes from his bride and to his last good brother. Itama, of the Senju clan, Itama replied, meeting Naruto's eyes for a moment with a smile before he turned his attention to Tsunade. Princess Tsunade, will you take this man? He asked amusedly, referring to her former title, earning an eye roll from the blonde beauty and slight chuckles from the guests. I take this man, Tsunade said, her voice strong and clear as her eyes found Naruto's. He smiled a tiny smile for her, and she relinquished her hold on Itama's arm at the gesture. Slowly she walked away from her brothers, and stepped around the pool until she stood face to face with Naruto. He offered his hand at once and she gave her own without hesitation. Naruto put a little pressure on her hand as he took it in his, holding her eyes and sharing a smile with her before they both turned slightly to face the holy tree. They knelt as one, their hands still clasped, and bowed their heads in submission to the priest who started the ceremony. Naruto knew that unlike him, Tsunade did not believe or pray to any gods, new and old, but he himself sent a silent prayer to them. A happy and contented life. That's all he asked for. That's all he ever wanted now. He squeezed her hand lightly again once he had finished, hoping that she would understand the pressure. She squeezed his hand back, and he assumed that she had. He raised his bowed head before rising slowly to his feet, keeping Tsunade's hand firmly in his own to keep her steady as she rose gracefully back up. With that, Naruto glanced behind him, nodding slightly to the Madara, who approached slowly with the royal Uchiha cloak draped over his arm. Naruto turned his attention back to his bride, moving his fingers to the clasp around her neck. He could feel her warm breath on the back of his hand as he unfastened her maiden's cloak from around her and slipped it away from her shoulders. He passed it back to the Madara, receiving the royal Uchiha cloak in return and sweeping it quickly around Tsunade's shoulders before she had the chance to get cold. His fingers shook ever so slightly as he fastened the clasp, knowing that this final gesture was the one that bound them fully as husband and wife. When he moved his hands away again, he met her eyes before taking both her hands in both of his, tugging her closer slightly. She moved willingly, her head already tilted up so she could meet his eyes. In that moment he wished that he had kissed her that night when they were alone in her chambers, when there had not been any other eyes on them. Now they were surrounded by people, and he could practically see Tsunade's nerves shining in her eyes. He couldn't not kiss her. For one thing he wanted to, and for another, it would look bad to those in attendance. They would make assumptions. Wrong assumptions, that he wished to avoid at all costs. He pushed that from his mind and leaned into Tsunade, tilting his head and closing his eyes the moment before their lips met. Hers were soft and warm as he had expected them to be, and he let his own linger for a long moment before he pulled back. She smiled widely when he did so, and he returned the gesture gladly, unable to believe that this moment he had dreaded for so many days had brought him such an inexplicable joy. "It's gorgeous, really, but I could not have another bite," Tsunade protested, raising her hands up to stop Naruto from tempting her with another forkful of raspberry and cream tart. "Are you certain I cannot persuade you?" he asked her teasingly, and she shook her head determinedly. "No, you cannot, not in this matter at any rate," she answered him, and he chuckled, laying the fork back down against his plate before contemplating his new wife. She had discarded her cloak due to the heat in the dining hall, and the unblemished skin of her arms was teasing him through the delicate lace of her sleeves. He was so busy admiring her that he didn't notice that she was no longer occupied with sipping from her wineglass. She cleared her throat slightly, and he snapped his eyes up to meet her amused gaze. Admiring the lace, she arched that one brow, and he smiled sheepishly. "Something like that," he muttered, holding her eyes for a moment before he turned to pick up his own glass. "It's been dark for rather a while," Tsunade mused quietly as he sipped down the sweet wine. "Indeed," he agreed with her after he swallowed his mouthful. "I wonder when." She hesitated. "When the call will come for us to leave," she finished, and Naruto moved his hand to lay across hers. "I will not allow anyone to accompany us to our chambers and risk having them embarrass either of us," he soothed her, rubbing his thumb against the back of her hand. "What do you mean?" She turned to frown at him. "I mean I will not have you teased, with the men and women ogling at you. I won't allow it. You're my queen," he explained. "We will retire when we are both ready. From that I can only assume that you are waiting on me." She smiled rather wickedly at him, and he narrowed his eyes at her. "And will you keep me waiting?" he asked her softly, leaning in slightly closer to her. No, the simple words sounded like magic, and Naruto's eyes could see the quickening of her breathing in the way her bodice rose and fell more rapidly. "Then will you allow me to escort you to our chambers?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Yes," she breathed back, that one word making his pants feel uncomfortably tight. Gods, he had been far too long without a woman. Looking at Tsunade, however, had him certain that his patience would be well rewarded. Slowly he pushed back his chair and rose up to his feet, offering her his hand. She took it, rising up to her own feet. At their action the dining hall seemed to pause, and Naruto swallowed hard, knowing he would have to address them. "The queen and I are retiring for the night," Naruto declared, knowing it was already close to early morning. The feast and celebrations had gone long into the night, with all clan heads and other leaders actually enjoying themselves to fine wine, delicious food, and exotic women whom Naruto had to reluctantly acquire for their amusement. Feeling Tsunade add pressure to his hand at his words gave him the courage to finish his addressal. "Please, in our absence continue to feast, drink and dance until whatever hour you choose." A cheer went up at his words, and there was the distinct clanking of many tankards and glasses. He saw his friends giving him amused grins, with Madara and Naori being the same. Taijima gave a brief nod, but the small smile on his lips was all the assurance Naruto needed from his father. Hashirama had far too many drinks and was already passed out. Itama was busy watching the exotic dancers but did give them a nod, but if previously Tobirama looked cold, right now he looked murderous. Unlike the other guests, the sour man had not enjoyed himself and sulked in a corner despite Tsunade's best attempts to cheer him up. Naruto could still remember the few words Tobirama had said to him when he managed to corner him away and when Tsunade was not looking. Tobirama had looked at the drunk clan heads before giving Naruto a cold look. "King Naruto, you'll be fighting their battles and grudges forever. I wish you good luck." Those words had hit a nerve with Naruto, and if not for the fact that Tobirama was Tsunade's brother and quite dear to her, he would have been more than willing to throw the bitter man in the dungeons. Maybe it was best if he kept an eye on him, an endeavor in which Tobi Shimura would prove greatly useful considering the man's utter contempt for Tobirama, as the Senju had killed two of the Shimura clan heads' brothers in the war. He felt Tsunade's worried gaze staring at him, which made him dismiss those dark thoughts and give her a reassuring smile. It was better if she didn't know about her brother's attempts to ruin their wedding with his bitter attitude. Naruto pulled Tsunade away from the high table and off the dais, skirting the edge of the dining hall rather than leading her through the middle of the throng of people. Her hand was holding on tightly to his, but he did not complain of the pressure, knowing that she was likely nervous. He himself was nervous, having never taken a Senju into his bed before. The last thing he wanted to do was hurt her, but he knew well enough that he would not be able to prevent all of her discomfort. It had been a surprise to him when she revealed to him that she had not been with any man before, Considering how beautiful she was, he found that hard to believe, not that it bothered him. It would be hypocritical of him, but the sincere look in her eyes was enough to make him believe her. In the end, he could not deny he felt happy to be her first and was determined to make it as bearable as possible. That was about as much as he could promise. After the first time he could promise her pleasure, his time with Shizuka and Makoto had taught him the best ways to satisfy a woman. He almost shuddered with desire, thinking of manipulating Tsunade's glorious body in any number of ways. How he longed to have her shaking beneath him, clenching tightly around him and crying out her relief to the gods. Damn it all, his pants really were unbearably tight now, and they were not even halfway up the stairs. He quickened the pace slightly, hoping that Tsunade would not be offended by his eagerness. With every step he reminded himself that he could not just remove her gown and ravish her as soon as they closed the door to their chambers. He had to be slow with her, gentle. He had to be patient and reassure her that he was happy to go at her pace. This time, at least. Gods! He almost groaned as he realized morning was barely a few hours away and they needed to rest thoroughly before the important announcements tomorrow. It wouldn't be good if they showed up half exhausted. Most of the clan heads would understand, but it would also send a bad message that their new king and queen valued their pleasure more than their duty. Neither of them could afford to let such rumors flow, not with this new peace so fragile and many clan heads still bitter with their grudges. All it would take was a minor slight and the war could start again. He could not afford that, not after everything that he had to give up. Everything his family gave up for him. Naruto could have wept in relief when they came upon their chamber door, and he pushed it open, pulling Tsunade in after him before he closed it firmly behind them and slid the lock into place. He turned to look at her then, seeing her eyes lingering on the locked door. I would leave it open, but we have rather a lot of people in the castle tonight, and a large portion of them will likely end up drunk and disorientated. He smiled reassuringly at her and she giggled slightly. His eyes were drawn to her hands, seeing how her fingers flexed towards her palms. He frowned, crossing to her and gently taking hold of her hands. Are you okay? He murmured, looking up to meet her eyes and seeing that a frown adorned her own face. I hate to think that anything here makes you feel uncomfortable. That I make you uncomfortable. If that is the case, then I won't. You don't. Tsunade protested at once, her hands flying to his chest as her head shook almost violently. You couldn't, you never did. Not once have I been uncomfortable in your presence. Apprehensive, yes. Nervous, yes. But not uncomfortable. You don't frighten me, Naruto. You have been kind and honest with me despite how cruel I was to you when we first met. He let one of his own hands come up and caress one of hers in response, hoping to calm the wild look in her eyes. Or control his own guilt, while it was true that he had been kind to her but honest? Not by a long shot, a fact which haunted him every moment he was with her. I wasn't accusing you, he said softly. I know you're nervous about tonight, but I swear the last thing in this world I want to do is hurt you. I know, she whispered, her free hand coming to toy with the leather lacings of his cloak. He didn't move. He kept silent, just watching the progress of her finger as she wound the lacing round and around it. When she tugged on it slightly, as though for permission, he met her eyes and inclined his head slightly. At his action she pulled more firmly, undoing the top of his cloak. He heard her take a steadying breath, and he stepped closer on hearing it, moving his hand from hers so he could place both of his on her waist. As slow as you like, he promised, not moving his eyes from hers. Say stop, and I will, without question. She nodded at his words, both hands at his chest working to unthread his shirt now. Naruto kept his hands resting gently on her waist as she slowly removed it and left his chest hanging open. He leaned in closer to her and brushed his lips against her cheek. She tilted her head at his action, turning it closer towards him. Her action was enough to encourage him to capture her lips with his. This time it was far from chaste, as he sucked her bottom lip between his own to encourage her to grant him access to her mouth. She did so, with a surprised gasp, and Naruto wasted little time, slipping his tongue into her mouth and kissing her deeply. Her own lips were tentative, but they were ever so soft and wonderful against his as she slowly adjusted to the rhythm he had set. He caressed her tongue with his own and she twisted hers deftly with his, causing him to pull on her waist until her body was pressed flush against him. She didn't protest as his closeness, if anything she reciprocated his advances, her hands moving from his chest so she could wrap her arms tightly around his neck. Her movement encouraged him to let his hands wander up her back, feeling the lacings of her dress as he did so. When he found the top of them, he blindly worked his fingers to untie them, feeling them come away beneath his touch. Tsunade twisted the fingers on one of her hands around the hair at the nape of his neck as he began to slowly unthread the lacings of her dress the way she had loosened his own clothes. She pulled away from his kiss when he reached halfway down her back, her breathing ragged and her eyes wide. "Should I stop?" he asked her, and she shook her head. "I just needed to breathe," she panted out, and he chuckled at her. "You'll get used to it," he said, still deftly unthreading her laces. "I do hope so." She smiled that wicked little smile that he had seen during the feast, and he couldn't help but return it. "I can't promise you a perfect night, Tsunade," he said seriously when he pulled the last of her lacings free. "This is already more than I ever imagined," she said just as seriously, and he smiled slightly. "I swear to you, I will make up for it very soon," he promised her, and she blinked slowly at him. "I don't know what that means," she said, her eyes wide on his. "It doesn't matter now," he said, shaking his head and moving his hands to run down the length of her arms. When he reached her shoulders, she allowed her arms to unwind from around his neck, moving them back to her sides. "Can I?" he asked her permission, digging his fingers underneath the silk covering her shoulders. She nodded her consent, and he dipped his eyes to look down at her hands as he began to pull down her dress. Her fingers twitched slightly, but they did not curl back against her palms as he peeled the silk down her arms and torso. She was wearing a flimsy shift beneath, and he was gratified to see that the buds of her breasts were peaked. He knew it could not be due to the cold, as their chamber was almost as warm as the dining hall had been, and there was no sign of gooseflesh on her skin. He delighted in revealing her skin, the soft, creamy expanse of it was entirely flawless. Nothing marred it. Not one scar nor blemish. Not so far anyway. Naruto made it his silent mission to explore every inch of her skin. Perhaps not tonight, but one night in the not-too-distant future. He would scour every inch. He promised himself that. He wanted to promise her, too, but he wasn't sure whether she would want to hear it at this point, as her beautiful wedding gown dropped and pooled at her feet. Naruto moved his hands back to her shoulders, massaging her gently as he met her eyes. "You can take this off yourself, when you're ready," he nodded towards her shift. "Thank you," she smiled at him, a proper smile that lit up her eyes. "That doesn't mean it has to be tonight," he elaborated, and she nodded, though he noticed that her eyes had widened slightly in surprise. "Perhaps if you lose a little of your own clothing," her tone was teasing, but he could hear the tiny shake in her voice. "As you wish, my queen," he decided against drawing attention to it, matching her intended teasing tone. He shrugged his pants carefully before reaching for his last piece of clothing. Suddenly he felt incredibly self-conscious with her eyes fixed so intently on him. The few scars across his body were now clear for her to see. It had never bothered either Makoto or Shizuka when he took them to his bed, but none of them had been Tsunade. Makoto had battle scars of her own and Shizuka was actually aroused by his scars. But the woman before him now was unlike his previous sexual partners. She was his milk-skinned wife and perfect in every manner. He bit down on his lower lip before he pulled the last piece of clothing, tossing it aside before looking to her for a reaction. Her eyes had widened slightly and his heart hammered, seeing how the perfect hazel of them was pulled towards his left leg. That was the worst of his scars, one which he had gained during an intense sparring match with Kurama. It hadn't been deep, but was bloody, and he had always known it would be with him forever. At least it was no longer angry, and pink, and raw. It was fully healed now, a flawless white against his skin. He swallowed, keeping his eyes on Tsunade as she moved her eyes over the rest of his chest and arms. She took a step closer to him, her fingers coming to whisper along his forearm and up to his bicep. Her forefinger traced a tiny scar just above the crease in his elbow, her eyes raising to his again. "How did you get this one?" she asked gently, and he wanted to kiss her and never stop. The relief in him was so overwhelming that he was almost crushed by the weight of it. "As a child, sparring with wooden swords with my brothers," he told her, "we were only wearing shorts because of the intense summer heat, and Inabi caught me on the arm. There was a nasty splinter in the wood and it embedded itself in my skin. The doctors pulled it out with, and I screamed the whole time, more to make Inabi feel guilty than anything else." He grinned at the end, and she smiled back at him, her eyes blazing with an intensity that he had never seen before as she looked at him. Slowly she moved her hands up to rest on her own shoulders, and Naruto swallowed hard as she hooked her fingers under the thin straps of her shift. He kept his eyes on hers as she slipped them slowly along her shoulders, unable to look away from her piercing gaze. "Take me to bed," she whispered, the wisp of silk that was her shift falling to the floor at her feet. Naruto didn't need telling twice, placing his hands on her now bare waist and steering her slowly towards the bed. He turned her gently so that she stood before him as he lowered himself to sit on the edge of the bed. She bit down on her lip as he allowed his eyes to wander the splendor of her. Still, he could see no flaw. No blemish. Nothing to suggest she was anything other than sheer perfection. Her breasts were firm and perfectly rounded, and he couldn't help but imagine how they would fit perfectly in his hands. Her waist was narrow and her stomach flat. His eyes wandered the curve of her hips, biting down on his own lip as he sought out what was between her creamy thighs. Gods! He wanted her. He looked up to her face again, seeing her eyes wide once more. "You're beautiful," he breathed, and he could see the relief relaxing all of her features. In the next moment he bent down to hurriedly throw away his sandals, before he straightened up again, pulling back the furs on the bed as he slowly stood up. "After you," he gestured for Tsunade to climb in, and she did so, clearly unsure of how she should arrange the furs around her. "Whatever makes you comfortable," he reminded her, and she drew them up around her waist at his words. Naruto averted his eyes momentarily as he moved to adjust his painfully hard length on the bed. He breathed a sigh of relief before he turned to climb in next to Tsunade, avoiding her gaze for the moment, only looking at her again when he too had drawn the furs up around his waist. "I don't know what to do next. I mean, I know the procedure, but not sure which route is best," she told him quietly, her hand reaching out to settle on his chest. "Will you guide me?" she asked shyly. "Of course," he replied, shifting himself carefully so that he could move above her. A flash of uncertainty crossed her features for a moment, but then he noticed her slowly moving her legs apart for him. "Follow your instincts," he breathed, settling himself between her legs before pressing a kiss to her neck. "If I do something you don't like, tell me to stop," he whispered, lavishing more kisses along her neck and collarbone. "And if you do like it, tell me to do it again," he continued in an amused tone, feeling her hands come to lay flat against the top of his back. "I like that," she said quietly. "What you're doing now?" He smiled against her skin, imagining the light blush that would have flared up on her cheeks. "Then I will continue," he murmured against her softness, nuzzling along her collarbone before he latched onto her neck. She gasped, her back arching up slightly against his body, her reaction encouraging him to let his hand wander slowly up towards her breast. Another gasp left her when he enclosed his hand around the perfect mound. He had been right, it did fit perfectly in his hand, and a tiny little hum left her mouth as he began to tenderly massage her. As he continued kissing her and caressing her, she began to slowly raise her hips up and grind against him as slowly as he was touching her breast. He stifled his own groan of pleasure in the skin of her neck, as a more pronounced hum of pleasure escaped her lips. The rolling of her hips was almost driving him wild now, and he shifted himself slightly so that his length could sit between her legs. "Don't stop," he gasped against her neck as her movements faltered. She obeyed him, continuing to grind herself against him in an agonizingly slow way. Naruto could feel her arousal against his hardness, and he knew that he could not ignore his own desires any longer. "Tsunade," he panted against her, tensing all his muscles in a bid to keep himself from peaking right there and then. "Have me," she gasped in response. "I want you to have me, completely." Gods, her words alone were the most arousing thing he could imagine. Her consent had him sneaking his other hand beneath the furs to squeeze around her thigh and encourage her leg to come and wrap around his waist. She took his hint, lifting her other leg to do the same. Naruto was positioned right at her entrance now, and he lifted his head up to meet her eyes. They were slightly unfocused, her forehead clammy with sweat and her hair mussed across the pillows. By the gods, she looked stunning. So undone and beautiful. Perfect in her imperfection. He held her eyes as he pushed down, her nails pinching little crescents into his back as he felt himself push through the barrier he was met with. A whimper escaped her, her teeth coming to clamp down on her lower lip once more. "I'm sorry," he hissed, forcing himself to still within her, even though the urge to rock himself over and over within her tight warmth was almost overwhelming. "Don't stop," she shook her head, her nails ceasing to dig into his back. He obeyed. Against his better judgment he obeyed her, rocking his hips back and forth. She grimaced and he faltered, but again she shook her head. There were tears in her eyes, but still she refused to let him stop, and fool he was, he could do nothing but continue thrusting into her. He knew she was hurting, but she felt so good around him and she was telling him to go on. In the end he had to bury his head in the crook of her neck so he didn't have to see the discomfort etched on her face. It was selfish, he knew, but he couldn't stand knowing that he was causing her pain. He kissed her neck, knowing from her own admission that she liked him to do so. Her fingertips whispered down his back in response, and he arched further into her involuntarily. His movement caused him to rock deeper inside her, and a cry that seemed half pain and half surprise escaped her. He closed his eyes tight shut as he thrust again, forcing himself to keep the pace slow as he felt his release building in him. He would not make Tsunade come this time, but he was determined he would show her every pleasure he knew how to elicit on the first chance they could get after tomorrow. He promised himself that as he exploded within her, panting hard and crushing his exhausted body down against her own as he twitched to his end inside her. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, when he had recovered enough breath to speak again. "Don't be." Her hands came to settle in his hair, gently twirling his locks around her fingertips. "Would you let me stay here?" she asked him quietly, unsure if he was ready to sleep by her side. She knew it was ridiculous after they just performed the most intimate act a couple could ever perform, but she just had to be sure that she was not violating his need for privacy. Alas, her concerns were totally wrong. "You don't even have to ask, of course I want you to stay here." He lifted his head up to meet her eyes. "I want you to stay here even when I am not here. I want these chambers to be ours, Tsunade," he told her insistently, and she smiled weakly at him. "Hold me," she whispered, and he shifted himself carefully to separate himself from her once more. He moved to her side and helped her settle herself across his chest, nestling her head under his chin and stroking one of his hands soothingly through her hair. "Will you promise to wake me so that we can leave tomorrow for court together?" she asked him sleepily, her nails clenching into his chest slightly as she spoke. "If that's what you want," he said, and she nodded against him. "I promise to treat you as my queen, my equal." "I will honor that promise," he said sincerely, making her smile and kiss him deeply again. A gesture which he was more than happy to reciprocate. Many things were uncertain even after their wedding and their challenges were just about to begin. But for tonight, they both nestled closely against each other and decided to forget about the world for once. Chapter 24. War of Conquest. He lay awake in bed staring at the soundly asleep person beside him. It was hard to believe that she was his wife now, bound to him for life. Just as he was to her. Last night was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. It was not just the pleasure that excited him but more the fact that there was an understanding between them. She had trusted him with everything, be it the future of her family or her own body, had understood and accepted him for who he was, and it made him feel horrible. He had promised to treat her as his queen, his lawful wife, his equal. To love and care for her, to provide and protect her from anything and everything. All his life he had lived by his own sense of honor. It was the only thing that had kept him sane after the things he had seen and done over the years. Others might consider it a stupid moral which shinobi should never abide by. But to him it was everything. If one cannot trust their own words, how could they expect others to do the same? But now he could slowly feel his honor slipping away from him. The sense of righteousness and justice that had always given him strength was now becoming his weakness because every second he realized he was lying to his wife. Honor dictated that he tell her the truth about his daughters with Shizuka. It was the right thing to do, and it was not as if he had done anything wrong because the deed was done before he ever met Tsunade. But duty dictated that he does everything in his power to protect his children from everyone in the world, no matter who they were. He was the one that gave those two growing babes life and it was his duty to keep them safe. This peace with the Senju was new and for all the growing friendship he was developing with Tsunade, he couldn't determine how she would react. Much less her brothers, especially Tobarama who was already dangerous as it was. In the end, torn between honor and duty he realized he was putting his family in danger. Family. Duty. Honor. A soundless chuckle escaped from his lips as he realized how the morals he had lived his life by were directly related to the words of a certain clan. He had always imagined the words fire and blood had something special in them, and they did. But the Uzumaki clan's words were the principles he had lived by his entire life. Madara was more an appropriate example of fire and blood. A day shall come when you'll have to choose, and your choice shall determine the fate of not just your family but that of the world. Shizuka's words haunted him even now and he still dreaded the remaining two events she had warned him about where he would be forced to make a choice. After what happened in his life in the past few months, he was now more than a believer of her words and prophecy. He was brought out of his thoughts when he felt Tsunade move and unknowingly wrap herself more closer to his side. The rays of the morning sun were now slowly entering their chamber, and he could not help but watch as they made her glow. Those golden hair of hers were a beacon of light, and her faintly moist skin was shining under the sunlight. A soft whimper escaped her lips, which made him run soothing circles in her back, eliciting a contented sigh from her. Despite his inner turmoil, a smile graced his lips, and he remembered he had made her a promise last night. His mind calculated the remaining time they had before their attendance at the royal court was required. Combined that with his own guilt, he decided to do something special for her just as he had promised her. With a single hand seal, he made a shadow clone who only needed a knowing gesture from its creator to understand what was needed. Grabbing a spare pair of clothes and a cloak from the wardrobe, the clone exited out of the room and shut the door very quietly. A sly grin graced his lips as he carefully extricated himself from their shared embrace and shifted himself on the bed. Tsunade moaned in a quiet whisper as he pressed a lovely but gentle kiss on the sensitive side of her neck. His hands were lightly coated in warm chakra, and he used them expertly to explore every inch of her body. He started with her shoulders, then moved to her slender arms, then to her beautiful breasts, followed by her waist and curvy legs. He could not help but grin proudly as her moans were now becoming louder and her body involuntarily was starting to crave his touch more and more. Unlike him, she was a very deep sleeper, but considering the building pleasure he was spreading across her body, he doubted she would stay asleep for long, and he needed her to be in her dream world just a little longer. It was why he made a hand seal and subtly encouraged her drowsy mind to remain in its little heaven a little longer. While using genjutsu was not something most Uchiha ever practiced on their partners during sex, he felt in this instance it would be worth it for her. He resisted the urge to kiss her lips and could feel his own hardness make its protest known. But he reminded himself this was about her, just as last night she had made every effort to satisfy him. Tsunade's hands tightly clutched the bedsheet as she felt a flame being ignited across her entire body. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before, and she could not help but crave for it even more. Her drowsy mind finally started to regain its senses, and she realized she was moaning a lot. She could sense a deep ache building between her legs. It was so painful yet enjoyable at the same time. Her eyes slowly fluttered open, and at first all she could see were dark blurs and stars. Gods, what was happening to her? Finally, her eyes regained their vision and she saw a faint mop of brown hair. Her gaze slightly widened when she saw Naruto was lying in between her legs, and as their gaze met she saw him kiss just above the most intimate part of her. Tsunade cried out loud in pleasure, and she was very wet, and her husband was grinning at her smugly. Naruto, she breathed questioningly, her chest heaving. He didn't respond with words. He responded by pressing a kiss between her legs, and she inhaled sharply, her hands fisting in the furs atop the bed. Naruto kissed her again, and this time his tongue flicked against part of her that made her body seemingly convulse. A gasp and a strangled cry left her mouth as he did it again, unable to stop her hips from rolling up towards him. Naruto seemed encouraged, gliding and swirling his tongue against her so deliciously that her head felt like it was spinning uncontrollably. Somewhere she was aware that she was moaning wantonly, and that her hands were scrabbling against the furs and sheets as though they were the only thing holding her in the real world. Because nothing else felt real as Naruto continued to lick, and kiss, and suck at the most secret part of her body. Her stomach tightened and her thighs began to shake. Instinct had her pressing them together as Naruto drove a pleasure through her that she felt sure would kill her if it continued any longer. He denied her instincts, his hands keeping her thighs firmly apart as he continued to feast between them. Her whole body was twitching now, almost violent convulsions rippling through her as she thrashed against the bed. Her back arched up and an agonized cry came right from the very pit of her stomach and released into their bedchamber as all her tensed muscles suddenly relaxed all at once. Vaguely she was aware that Naruto had released his hold on her thighs, and slowly she became aware of him kissing his way back up her body. She lay there dazed, panting hard to regain her breath as her heart hammered in her chest. Her thighs still twitched involuntarily, and little spasms shot through her entire body. Every pore tingled deliciously, as though she had just been shattered into a million pieces and then put back together again. It was incredible. Indescribable. So much pleasure should surely not be allowed. Tsunade closed her eyes momentarily as her head began to clear a little more, becoming aware of her skin being damp across her forehead and between her breasts. She could feel it behind her legs as well, and between her thighs. By the gods, she must look a mess, but Naruto was looking at her as though she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen when she opened her eyes again. "How?" she breathed, the only word she felt capable of uttering at his moment. He smiled widely in response, running his hand across her brow to push her damp hair away from her forehead. "I promised," he said simply, and she just about managed to smile at him before he leaned down to kiss her. She lost herself in him, tasting the difference of him and realizing with a jolt that it was because she was tasting herself on his lips. He obviously noticed her moment of surprise as he pulled back, his fingers slowly coming to caress along her cheek. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, and she bit down on her lip. "I am not sure how a person is ever supposed to become accustomed to such a thing," she told him honestly, and he dropped a light kiss to the tip of her nose. "I don't think it would be the same if it were something we were to grow used to," he responded, and she hummed her agreement, nodding slightly. Even in her dazed state, she saw he was painfully hard and could not imagine how much he must have restrained himself to give her pleasure. She could not but not want to give him the same joy. Her hand reached for his hardness, but he stopped her midway. Their gaze met and she was surprised when without any words she understood his message. It was so strange to be able to communicate with someone just through a single gaze, but damn if she did not understand him or admire his adherence to his duty as king. How could someone so faithfully stick to their own morals no matter the temptation? She knew she couldn't not with what he offered her. But he was different from her, stronger and rational, not just in the physical manner. He was an enigma to her, an Uchiha she had never seen before. And he was hers. She nearly jumped in surprise when their chamber door quietly opened, but he grabbed her hand reassuringly, and it was then she realized it was a clone of his who was carrying a large tray full of juice and breakfast. A lone tear threatened to slip from her eye as the clone pushed a table right beside her bed and placed the delicious-smelling breakfast right before her. Naruto smiled at her stupefied expression as he got out of the bed, and Tsunade could not help but admire his well-toned and muscled body, and his scars as well. The clone gave her a last smile before he joined beside its creator. She remained silent and mesmerizingly watched as Naruto donned a fresh pair of clothes minus a shirt, which only served to arouse her more. He went to his desk and wrote something on a piece of parchment before passing it to his clone, who read it, nodded, and then silently went out of the room again. When that was done, she watched him momentarily stare at the vast capital spread out before him through the lone window of their chambers. Tsunade could not help but notice as the sunlight bathed his chest, and to her surprise not even a patch of his skin became red due to the heat. She then remembered the horrible tale of him slaughtering Uchiha traders and how he had not burned in the inferno that consumed them all, but not him. Maybe some of the tales were not false. Maybe few of his kind really did descend from dragons. It was the only phenomenon she could think of, for no matter how powerful a ninja was, they were still vulnerable to fire. But not him. The young dragon, they all called him, and she could not help but agree as she watched his form in the light that the name truly suited him. Naruto? He turned towards her with a gentle smile, and she could not help but feel greatly happy. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice wavering just slightly, but he didn't mind. He silently came towards her and laid a gentle kiss on her lips before breaking apart and moving towards the breakfast tray. She was about to intervene, but one look from him made her stop midway. He was a man of few words, but his actions and deeds spoke for him. A fact she realized more and more with every moment that she spent with him. Together, they both enjoyed their first breakfast, and throughout the entire morning there was a radiant smile on her face. Hashirama had seen many great and terrible things in his life, but even he could not deny the sight before him today was possibly the greatest he had ever seen. Standing on top of the city walls, he could not help but admire the mass of gathered humanity. 50,000 soldiers. He could see countless flags of different ninja clans, with many familiar to him. Half of the army was made up of ninjas of all sorts, be they clan warriors, nomads, or individuals. The remaining half was made up civilian soldiers, shogun warriors, samurai, and a few mercenary companies. It was possibly the largest and most powerful army united under one banner for the first time after the Sage of Six Paths reigned over the world. And every one of these fighters was here for one reason alone: the War of Conquest. Once upon a time, the Rikudo Sannin and his family ruled over the entire world, but that dynasty shattered due to the war between Indra and Ashura. What was once a united realm was divided into so many pieces, with different nations rising and falling over the thousands of years. But now the true rulers of the world were now determined to get back what was theirs. The Uchiha and Senju were destined to rule over the world, maintaining the peace the sage wanted. Hashirama knew this war would take many lives, but he had hoped that once the world was united, the scale of conflict could be controlled to an extent. He was no fool to think that war would ever end, despite what many believed. It was in man's blood, and so long as there were men, there would be war. But it was also true that peace could also be maintained if men wanted it. In a way, it was not just the desire for peace, but many other favorable factors that contributed to this change. The most important being the fact that too much blood had already been shed among the ninja clans, and most lords realized their families would die if they continued fighting each other. The power play by the daimyo only fueled to sow the seed of unification. The union of the Uchiha and Senju along with the arrival of the strongest Biju of the world was the final nail in the coffin. Humans respected and feared power, and currently Naruto Uchiha was the most powerful man in the world. The boy was by no means perfect and had faults of his own, but he knew how to rally people to his cause. This grand army had not just rallied to him because of his alliance with the Senju, but for the fact that many of these soldiers wanted what most humans wanted: fame, wealth, fights, lands, and immortality. They all knew that this war could and would give them just that, because if Naruto Uchiha managed to win, then he would be the first after the Rikudo Sennin to rule over the world. Whether his dynasty survived for long or not, humanity would remember the first king to rule over their race, and all those who lived and died for the king would most probably be remembered for a long time. Another beneficial factor was the fact that the alliance with the Senju and the daimyo's resources gave Naruto the ability to start this war. The last harvest had been bountiful, and there was enough food, coin, weaponry, and supplies to run this grand army. It also benefited from the presence of many great leaders of war, which assured a sound and reliable chain of command for the men to depend upon. The Land of Fire was finally rid of war, and it had immensely boosted morale, making thousands of eager civilians to join the king's cause in hopes of making something for themselves. Already, the popularity of the Dragon King was soaring high day by day, and if he won, then he would forever be immortal. The only problem to this war was the fact that winter was almost upon them, and the elemental nations were soon going to be engulfed in dangerous weather. Many learned men had foretold the coming winter would be harsh and severe, if not long. Waging a world war in such a time was not advisable, but Naruto had no other choice. The entire Land of Fire, while enjoying peace, was getting scarcer to sustain so many ninja clans and civilian population. More than that, old feuds that were being kept in check for now would soon resurface if these men and women were not given a cause to fight for. One way or another, this war had to happen if Naruto's reign was to last more than a year. Hashirama glanced at the tallest and most powerful banners among the army. On the left flank was a flag very familiar to him, with a roaring antler flying high in the sky. "Ours is the Fury." Not many of his people often recited their clan's words, but those were the words of their ancestors, and Hashirama knew they were truer than ever, for even the mighty Uchiha had been wary of the Senju's fury if they went too far in the war. On the right flank was the famous and dangerous dragon banner of the Uchiha clan, flanked by many smaller ones of their allies and comrades alike. Fire and blood. Every Uchiha ever born often chanted those words more than 1,000 times in their lifetimes. For all their arrogance and stubbornness, they were one of the finest fighters in the world, feared and respected even by the Senjus. On top of both these banners was a new banner. It was unique, but at the same time a combination of the best traits of both clans. A roaring three-headed dragon. Hashirama could not help but respect Naori Uchiha's shrewdness, as she took the best of both clans to give an identity to a dynasty that shall rule over the world if the gods were in favor. It gave due respect to the families it originated from, but at the same time placed the dynasty above them as well. He was brought out of his thoughts when he heard thousands of whispers at once. He didn't need to wait for long to determine the source behind this commotion. To say it was a grand entrance would be an understatement. For many of these warriors, it was the first time they ever saw a Biju, much less the strongest of the beasts, and the Kyubi did cut a menacing figure in his full glory. Hashirama still could not get over his surprise at the size of the beast, nor its mighty tails that would be enough to smash the capital to ground in minutes. It towered over men and women, making each of them adequately aware about their own inferior existence. If rumors were to be believed, many Uchiha were already starting to worship the fox as their new god. When the beast roared, every soul across thousands of miles of earth was silenced, with every pair of eyes glancing at the beast and the golden armored warrior standing on top of it. The war strategy had already been discussed among the top ninja leaders, and various leadership appointments were already finalized during the Royal War Council. But any leader was worthless unless their men supported them, and the Dragon King knew that very well. Hashirama had been more than pleased on seeing the radiant smile on his beloved sister's face when he met her in the morning. She had assured him that Naruto was truly good and kind to her, even going so far as declaring her his equal in front of all the leaders. Not only did he allow her to fight by his side in this war, but also made her one of his commanders. Under the guidance of Dean Nara and other leaders, the war strategy was decided based on the information collected over the past few weeks by the Shamura, Inuzuka and Aburame scouts stationed at the borders. Word had spread of Naruto's coronation and his intent to rule over the world. Naturally, it threatened the future of various ninja clans, noble lords, daimyos, and even samurai spread across the world. It was not a surprise when news came that two great armies had been formed to destroy the Dragon King and his allies. The first was made up of the samurai nation that were being funded by at least four important daimyos across the world. Made up of seasoned samurai, minor ninja clans, shogun and mercenary companies, it was an army containing 40,000 strong fighters. The second resistance had opened up in the Land of Wind, whose daimyo joined forces with the daimyo of the Land of Earth. Together those two factions had managed to rally a force of 30,000 fighters, with half of them ninjas. It was not taking into account the two smaller armies led by the ousted Fire Daimyo's relatives that were currently marching to retake the capital, even if it was a lost cause. In comparison to that challenge, Naruto had a force of 50,000 fighters, with half of those numbers being ninjas and a biju. The king displayed his prowess at warfare by making crucial decisions after hearing the advices of his supporters. The first priority was to crush the internal rebellion within the Land of Fire. For that purpose, two small but strong forces were formed. One would be led by Sasuke Sarutobi, who would command 8,000 fighters to crush the daimyo loyalists in the east. The second would be led by Madara and Tobirama themselves, with a force of 10,000 warriors to crush the daimyo loyalists approaching from the west. Many had suggested Hashirama to work alongside his old friend, but the king emphasized that he needed a fighter of Hashirama's caliber for his own campaign. Apparently, having a biju would not be enough for the enemy they would be going up against. When both of these armies managed to crush their opponents, their orders were to join forces and march on to face the armies of Land of Wind and Earth. In the meantime, Naruto himself would lead a force of 22,000 fighters and his biju to face the entire might of the samurai nation. The king's plan was to crush the larger army first before attacking the Land of Wind and Earth from the east, while Madara and Tobirama did the same from the south. Surrounded from both sides, their enemies would have no choice but to surrender or face annihilation. It was a great challenge, to say the least, for the fact that the enemy had greater numbers, but numbers didn't always help in winning wars. It surely raised the odds, but Naruto had some of the finest clans in the world on his side, a highly motivated army and a monstrous biju to support his cause. To protect their homeland from any external threats and maintaining the peace, Taijima Uchiha and Dean Nara would remain behind with a handful leaders along with 10,000 of the last fighters. Together, both veteran and experienced leaders would keep the peace until Naruto returned, while also building the ninja village the king had ordered to be constructed. Dean was more than capable of ruling, and Taijima was firm enough to keep the peace. Madara would have leaders like Tobirama, Tobi Shimura, Makoto Uchiha, Sasuke Sarutobi, Ken Hatake and Kakashi Hatake, Rei Namikaze, Tori Yamanaka, Hiro Inuzuka and several civilian generals acting as his commanders. Naruto would be supported by Tsunade, Hashirama, Itama, his Kinsguard friends, Naori Uchiha, Shin Aburame, Yakumo Kurama, and remaining civilian generals. Taijima would protect their rising nation with the help of Dean Nara, Nakamura Akimichi, and Tsukumo Hatake. The preparations and plannings were finished, now it was time for war. Warriors of Fire. Naruto's thunderous roar boomed across the entire land, garnering the attention of every fighter present. He had to steel his heart as he literally watched an entire river of different colors step closer to him and Kurama. What made it more daunting was the fact that it was not a river of water, but a sheer army of 50,000 fighters. And each and every one of them was looking at him, their king. For the first time in his life, his throat felt dry and his hands were shaking. He knew becoming king would give him great power, but watching this army before him frightened him. The fate of all these souls rested upon his decisions. Standing so high on Kurama's back made him oblivious to the identity of every fighter, but he knew they were all looking at him. They had answered his call to arms, now it was his duty to lead them. But God's damn him if he wasn't excited and scared at the same time. For far too long has this world remained divided. For far too long we have killed each other in the name of our families, for honor, for glory, for revenge. Long have we forgotten the time when our ancestors ruled this world, long have we forgotten the fact that our ancestors shared their homes, their lives, their families with each other. Roared Naruto passionately. He stepped at the edge of Kurama's head so he could be visible to each and every man, woman and child present here. Whether he liked it or not, whether they believed it or not, whether he was worthy or not, he was their king. It was the Great War that broke us apart. But the Great War is over, yelled Naruto defiantly. Thousands of approving roars were unleashed at his statement, which was a stark proof of the fact that perhaps Hashirama and Naruto were not the only ones who craved for peace. Still, he was here to unite everyone regardless of their different views. You are here not to fight for me but to fight beside me. To take back what is rightfully ours, to once again unite mankind once and for all. A small smile graced his lips when from the Uchiha side started a thunderous roar with thousands of men banging their fists against their shields and armor. What surprised him more was the fact that the call was valiantly answered by the Senju side as well. From this day forth we fight for more than ourselves. From this day we fight to preserve, protect, and unite mankind. In fury, fire, and blood was this world created. It is time we reunited again with fury, fire, and blood. We are not conquerors. We are not raiders. Taijima's breath stopped when he watched his son unleash the Uchiha's ancestral weapon high in the air. There was a momentary illumination as the light of the sun was dwarfed by the sword's light which bathed Naruto in all its glory, making thousands upon thousands gasp at the sight before them. Arise! Men of Dawn! A deafening sea of roars engulfed the land for thousands of miles as friends and enemies, comrades and rivals, civilians and ninjas, men and women all unleashed their swords, their shields, their spears, their flags and gave out a battle cry that was louder and fiercer than the one unleashed by the giant Biju before them. Kurama had never understood why his creator had always insisted to have faith in humans. The Sage of Six Paths belonged to a race greater than the humans, yet he had loved this race as if they were his own children. He had fought for, believed and eventually died for these strange creatures. For a very, very long time Kurama had only seen the worst side of this race, but today for the first time in his existence he felt hope for them. From the corner of his eyes, he saw the man who made this miracle possible point his ancestral sword at the Grand Army. Men of Dawn! Oaths we have taken, let's fulfill them all. The first Dragon King raised his sword towards the skies, unleashing the cry that changed the world forever. For mankind. Chapter 25. The Wild Dragon. Madara watched their massive army starting to split up into three groups as they reached the crossroads point. He looked back and saw the distant silhouette of the capital where they had left his father, Dean Nara, and Tsukumo Hatake in command of 10,000 men to defend their nation. The remaining would march to war. He had been initially surprised by his brother's decision to conquer the remaining elemental nations because his brother was not someone who craved for power like Taijima did. But Naruto had stated that as long as the nations remained divided, their isolation and conflicts would never end. He wanted to bring them all together so that a proper chain of command could be established that could keep ninjas in check and resources to be distributed a little more equally. But the darkest reason behind this war was a simple fact that Naruto knew better than anyone else. There were simply too many ninjas in the world. And as long as men knew how to fight and kill, they would never stop. Madara knew he himself craved for good fights, and there were thousands of shinobi who shared those feelings. In simple but harsh terms, this war would change that. It was a bitter fact that many ninjas, samurai and civilian fighters were going to die in this war. Naruto knew this better than anyone because he had made this decision even after being aware of that fact. Madara and Taijima were the only ones who were aware of the king's plan if he won the war. To say it was logical to an extent was an understatement, but it remained to be seen if that dream would ever come true. He angled his warhorse in the direction of his brother, who was also watching his own force march in a different direction. Naruto saw him coming and wordlessly approached towards him with the fox right by his side. Madara got off his horse and stepped before his brother. Sometimes it was still hard for him to see this man as a king rather than the little boy who used to run after Izuna. But those days were gone, they were not the same boys anymore. But they were brothers, and nothing in this world was going to change that. It was why Madara saw through Naruto's outwardly calm and composed facade to realize the true feelings in the boy's heart. "Are you afraid?" asked Madara bluntly. Naruto gave a hesitant nod, earning a grim look from his eldest brother as Madara placed a hand on the king's shoulder. "Good. Because once you get into the fight, win," advised Madara. I will promise, Naruto solemnly. From the corner of his eyes, Madara saw Hashirama and his siblings were also saying their own farewells. Naori and Taijima had already did the same with him, and currently his aunt was marching alongside the Kinsguard members. Seeing that Naruto was still nervous, he decided to cheer up the boy one last time. Gods only knew how long it would be before they met, and he could only imagine how his grim brother could survive that long with such gloomy thoughts. Gods, in some ways Naruto reminded him of Hashirama, and he could barely tolerate one man of that kind. Next time I see you, I guess you'll be covered in gold, japed Madara, suggesting the riches Naruto would get once he defeated the other nations. Naruto glanced at his own golden armor that Madara had given him years ago. It brought a tiny smile on his lips. It always did suit me, he retorted, earning a grin from his eldest brother. The king's gaze shifted towards Tobirama, who was now talking with Tsunade. He couldn't help but look at his brother seriously. Be careful, warned Naruto. Madara caught his brother's gaze and snorted. It would be a cold day in hell before the wild dragon will be intimidated by the likes of him. Besides, if he does try something, I'll crush his bloody skull, said Madara darkly, a savage grin visible on his lips. I'm serious, brother, said Naruto with a frown. So are we. Naruto blinked and found himself facing not just his former lover but also the likes of Tobi Shamura, Rei Namikaze, along with Ken and Kakashi Hatake, the two sons of Tsukumo Hatake. All of them were brave and loyal Uchiha bannermen. Watching them stand around Madara gave him the reassurance he desperately needed. See, I'm well protected, said Madara sarcastically. Naruto ignored his brother and glanced at the people around him. His eyes were as cold as ice in order to make sure they understood his orders. Make sure no harms come to him from enemies and other parties, commanded the king. Don't worry, my king. They all would have to go through me, my son Danzo, and every Shamura first before they can even touch our Hokage, promised Tobi fiercely, his intense eyes glaring at Tobirama. Can't let a handsome man like that to be harmed, teased Rei Namikaze, much to Madara's surprise as she winked at him. Naruto raised an eyebrow questioningly at his brother when he saw the faint blush on Madara's cheeks. I guess even wild dragons can be tamed. You saved our sister from the Yamanaka. We'll keep your brother safe, my king, promised Ken Hatake, earning a nod from his younger brother Kakashi as well. Nodding respectfully towards Tsukumo's sons, Naruto turned towards the last person of the group. Even now he couldn't help the stirring in his heart when he looked at her. But he had made a choice and he had to live with it, so he didn't let his inner turmoil be visible on his face. I am his sworn shield. I'll defend him with my life, promised Mikoto, as she gave him a strained smile. Thank you, he whispered. They both stared at each other, their eyes not willing to part until a light cough from Madara brought them back to reality. It was then Naruto noticed that the other members of the group were awkwardly trying not to stare at him and Mikoto. Was the tension that easy to see? Thankfully, Madara knew just the right thing to break the ice. Farewell, my king, said Madara teasingly, and even went forward to give a short bow, but his playful mocking eyes made Naruto well aware of his brother's amusement. It was certainly not missed by the others as they chuckled at the antics of the wild dragon. You too, Hokage, replied Naruto teasingly, with his own trademark smirk. Both sons of Taijima stared at each other for a brief second before moving forward to embrace each other in a fierce hug. Naruto closed his eyes as he memorized this moment in his brain, and he had a feeling Madara was doing the same. When they parted, they both whispered at the same time, "May we meet again." With one last smile, Naruto climbed atop Kurama as Madara and his comrades did the same with their horses. Sharing one last glance, both brothers galloped in the opposite directions, never looking back. What the hell are you saying? Hissed Tsunade, her murderous gaze staring at her brother. Only what you cannot see, sister. I say it because I care about you, insisted Tobirama calmly, but was disappointed when it enraged his only sister even more. I will do no such thing. Not only is it a sin, but it will be a betrayal, said Tsunade furiously. It is no sin nor a betrayal if you do not allow your womb to give birth to a dragon spawn, explained Tobirama patiently. No. Tobirama felt his patience waning in the face of the sheer stupidity of his family members. First his brothers and now his only sister were blind enough to trust an enemy they had fought against for thousands of years. All I'm asking is you to not allow him to make you with child. I understand Hashirama forced you into this, but it does not mean that you have to sacrifice so much, said Tobirama heatedly, making her sigh. It is true that Hashirama forced me into this marriage, and initially, I was opposed to it as well. But Naruto is a good man, brother. He cares for me, if not love me. I will not betray him by killing whatever children we may have in the future just because you think we should not trust him. I can understand not trusting the Uchiha, but I want you to trust Naruto at least. For me, pleaded Tsunade, taking his hands in her own and hoping to gods he understood her request. Out of all her brothers, Tobirama had always watched out for her most. He could be overprotective and stubborn, but whenever she needed him, he had always been there. The only reason this marriage had even happened was because when the decision was made, Tobirama was a prisoner of the Uchiha. She doubted Hashirama could have pulled this union off easily if Tobirama was there. Likely, he would have given Hashirama the most severe tongue lashing of his life, and if he still persisted, then Tobirama would have found some other way to make sure she didn't have to go through with this marriage. And she would have thanked her brother for it had she not come to know the kind of man Naruto was. It was not ideal or the best, but she couldn't deny it was not a terrible match. Maybe in time they could hope to understand, trust and love each other. Tobirama glanced at the king, followed by few of his own supporters that were lingering nearby. What she was asking of him was a great deal, but after him Tsunade was the one in their family who hated the Uchiha most. She would not be blinded by emotions so easily, but if a person like her was vouching for the kinslayer, had he been wrong in judging Naruto Uchiha? He could not know for certain, but he loved his sister more than any of her other brothers ever did. If she was happy and hopeful, Tobi, please, begged Tsunade, and smiled in relief when his hard gaze shattered and he gave out a tired sigh. I will never trust the kinslayer or the Uchiha. Not after what they did to my brother and our people, but if you are happy with him, then I will let this go. But if he ever hurts you in any manner, I will kill him and his entire family, promised Tobirama murderously, gripping her hands fiercely. Tsunade felt a chill run down her spine as she felt and saw the raw hate in her brother's eyes. The only thing stopping him from rebelling against this alliance was his love for her and his devotion to Hashirama. For all his faults, Tobirama had always been a loyal member of their family and had followed Hashirama's orders without question. But she could understood this alliance with the Uchiha and her marriage were too much for him to accept, but he would if she asked him. It was why she loved him despite all his faults. He relaxed in her arms as she hugged him, but his next words made her heart skip a beat. I have quite a few of my supporters in your camp. The moment you feel you are in danger from him or anyone else, go to them. They will protect you, whispered Tobirama, and Tsunade saw nearly a dozen men in Naruto's army give her a subtle nod when she looked in their direction. Her brother's men, loyal only to him and not the king. It troubled her and she was just about to protest when she caught Naruto and Makoto staring at each other intensely. No words were exchanged between them, but the look in their eyes was enough to make Tsunade feel betrayed. Her hands tightly gripped her brother's armor as she couldn't understand why this was happening after all the progress she and Naruto had made in their friendship. He loves Makoto and always would. The traitorous voice in her head only seemed to break her heart even further until she remembered that Naruto had promised her that he would treat her as his lawful wife and he would not cheat on her. She remembered how seriously he took his promises and the fact that he broke up with Makoto to do his duty. Duty? Was that what she was to him? Was the kindness that he showed her just a way of him showing her pity? Doubts started to plague her mind and she decided to stop them for now lest she go mad. Saying her goodbye to Tobirama, she mounted her own horse before joining beside her husband. Are you all right? He asked, concern visible in his eyes as he glanced at the frown on her face. Yes, she answered monotonously, even if the true answer was buried deep within her heart. I don't know. 1 week later, Madara walked through his army camp observing the soldiers and ninjas were sharpening their weapons. It would seem word had spread fast that their enemy had been spotted and would be upon them by tomorrow. However, Madara was pleased to see it had not affected the men's morale, certainly not after the good news they had received yesterday. Sasuke Sarutobi had emerged victorious in his campaign and had crushed the former daimyo's nephew and his army to the last man. The fact that the majority of the former royals perished on the battlefield was another bonus. But then again, victory was assured on that front as Sasuke had nearly 8,000 men with him while his enemy had half, with only a quarter being ninjas. In crude terms, it was pure slaughter, and now the Sarutobi host was marching towards the land of wind, but they would wait for Madara to join them first before carrying on the campaign. That victory had been much needed to be heard about by the men in Madara's army, as it gave them the strength to face their first battle of this war. Unlike the host Sasuke faced, Madara's foe was Isshin Minamoto. The old man was the former daimyo's uncle and an experienced battle commander who had twice destroyed attempts by Land of Wind to conquer the Land of Fire. He was a stern but fair man and skilled with the sword. The fact that he was the last living male member of his family only made his fight for survival more dire. The men following Isshin were roughly 6,000 loyalists, with more than half being ninjas from all over the world who had benefited greatly under the daimyo's rule. It was fair to say these men would be fighting desperately in the coming battle and with twice the passion Madara's force could ever muster. Even if Madara had 10,000 battle-hardened ninjas with him, it wouldn't hurt to not underestimate his enemy, even if the old man was a civilian general. What made him more worried was the news that Naruto and his 22,000-strong host had crossed the Land of Fire and were now on their way to face the army of the samurai nation led by Hanzo Salamander and Mifune of the samurai, who nearly had 40,000 men under their command, with more than 15,000 of them being ninjas. Even if Naruto had good fighters like Hashirama and Abiju with him, Madara couldn't help but worry for his little brother. He could only pray that Naruto managed to achieve victory, because if the boy lost, then the ninjas following him would start having doubts about his leadership. And a doubtful ninja was very dangerous, for he could attack anyone perceived to be a threat. His eyes glanced at the group of young ninjas following around him in a protective circle, which brought a small smirk to his lips. He had got the idea for this group after watching his brother's Kinsguard and their exploits over the years. To say he had high hopes from his own 5 battle partners would be an understatement. The leader of this group was Makoto Uchiha, a former member of Naruto's Kinsguard. She was a very skilled fighter and had aptly demonstrated her skills against Madara long enough to earn the Hokage's respect. Combine that with her recommendation from the king, she soon found herself appointed commander of Madara's personal guard. The next member was Danzo Shamura, son of Tobi Shamura. The boy was young but extremely skilled in ninjutsu and taijutsu. He also had a keen sense of observation and cunning. Most of all, he distrusted senjutsu, which would be helpful as the boy would always watch out from any kind of treachery and warn Madara beforehand. The next 2 members were both sons of Tsukumo Hatake. He had been very impressed when Ken and Kakashi had displayed their swordsmanship to Madara. Ken was a gifted taijutsu master and adept with ninjutsu, while his brother was a master of every ninja art. The fact that Naruto saved their sister Kiara from the Yamanaka's clutches not too long ago only made the boys more determined to serve their king's brother. The last member of the group was Shibi Aburame, son of Shin Aburame. Unlike the others, he was not a great but an average fighter. However, he was a skilled long-range ninja and his spying skills were off the charts, which Madara had not missed. Plus, Madara couldn't resist awarding the Aburame leader's son a chance to earn glory for himself after their clan's loyal service to Madara's family for years. Madara couldn't help but notice that except for Makoto, who was a servant's daughter, all the other members of his guard were high-born noble heirs of important clans loyal to the Uchiha. Many more nobles from other Uchiha loyalists also wanted their sons and daughters to join and serve the Hokage, but for now Madara was content with the group he had assembled. It was better if he had few warriors whom he could absolutely trust than have an army whom he couldn't. He bid them to stand outside his tent and they obeyed without hesitation. When he entered, his good mood vanished as he saw a very familiar person waiting for him. Tobirama, said Madara simply, making the Senju look up from the map on Madara's table. Lord Hokage, replied the Senju, his unervingly blank eyes seemingly boring into Madara's very soul. It still vexed the eldest son of Taijima that his brother had sent him this man to act as his second in command instead of Hashirama. While it was true that Tobirama was more sensible than most ninja lords, it was also a fact that the man had always unnerved Madara. There was something about him that just didn't sit right with the new Hokage. Regardless of that, they were allies now and it was important that they crush a common enemy. The men are ready, reported Tobirama briskly, cutting through any unwanted pleasantries much to Madara's relief. Good. We cannot allow Isshin Minamoto to achieve any victory here. How do you propose we deal with him? Asked Madara straightforwardly. Tobirama blinked. What? Snapped Madara irritatedly. I never thought someone like you would ask a Senju for advice, answered Tobirama honestly, and was not surprised when Madara sighed. It's not my style, but things aren't the same anymore. My brother made you second in command of this host. Despite our enmity, he sees something in you, Tobirama. I want to see what that is. revealed Madara sincerely. Why did you and your father even agree to this peace? Gods know you two hate my family, said Tobirama seriously, earning a snort from Madara. Some things are more important than revenge and old feuds, whispered Madara. What is that thing? Questioned Tobirama curiously. Family. Tobirama had to look away in order to not meet Madara's gaze. One look at the Hokage was enough to show he meant what he said, which only confused Tobirama even more. How could an Uchiha even understand a concept like that? Thankfully for him, Madara was not in a bad mood and decided to explain, if only to not have this conversation again between them. I know you don't trust us Uchiha, including my brother. Well, the feeling's mutual. I'm not asking you to trust me or become friends, but your sister and my brother are trying to build something. I don't know about you, but I love my brother, and if he believes we can live with Sinjust, then I can bloody well give it a try at least. Besides, someone like you should understand how this peace is beneficial for your family as well. True that the future kings will have the Uchiha name, but they will have the Senju blood in them as well, explained Madara honestly. I see, was all Tobirama said, before he focused back on the map. His sister's plea for him to give this peace a chance passed through his heart. Hashirama and Itama had also wished for the same. Tobirama had seen it in their eyes. Whatever lingering hesitation he had was severely affected when someone like Madara expressed his own desire to give this peace a try. Had he gone wrong somewhere? Would his actions actually place his family in harm's way? He felt a stinging pain resonate across his head, which nearly made him cringe. Thankfully, Madara was busy looking at the map and hadn't missed Tobirama's momentary discomfort. No, don't trust the Uchiha. They killed your brother. The voice in his head whispered ever so treacherously and even more insistently than before. He looked at his right arm, and from the slight parting in his shirt he could see the area near his shoulder was starting to change. Where once the skin was pale like the moon, now lay a darkened layer that only seemed to spread ever so slightly. The Senju medic he had seen had warned him that it was unlike anything he had ever seen before. He had asked the man to keep this to himself, but it was only getting worse every passing day, and Tobirama was running out of time. Tobirama? He looked up to see Madara staring at him with a frown on his face. Yes, asked the Senju, hoping his voice sounded the same as ever. You're sweating and your hand is trembling, commented Madara, and Tobirama cursed himself for letting the Uchiha see a weakness. It didn't matter that it was out of his control, Madara, or as a matter of fact no one else should be allowed to discover it. Just nervous about this war, said Tobirama hesitantly. To his relief, Madara actually accepted the answer, but then again, it was partially the truth. Good. It'll keep you focused and alive on the battlefield. Now tell me your thoughts on the strategy we should take against Isshin, asked Madara seriously. Tobirama controlled his pain and the treacherous whispering in his head to look at the map and the enemy position. He might not like the Uchiha, but his family wanted peace. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but if someone like Madara could come to terms with this peace, then he had to try. For me, brother. Tobirama violently silenced the whispers in his head as the face of his beloved sister flashed before his eyes. He had not missed how happy she was this morning and how she wanted to believe in Naruto. He might never like the kinslayer, but he had a duty towards his only sister. The Uchiha aren't the only one who value family above all else. His trembling hands stopped shaking as he felt strength return back inside his body. His fierce cold eyes glanced at the map as a plan started forming in his head as the whispers faded away. Here's the plan. By the time he was done explaining his idea, Madara was grinning savagely and Tobirama couldn't help but share the feeling even if he remained composed on the outside. He would give the wild dragon a chance to prove himself regardless of what his allies believed or wanted. He would do it for her and not anyone else. Tobirama stood at the outskirts of the Naka River with an army of 9,000 men, all of them currently hiding in the forest just near the river. The censor ninjas had already warned them of the approaching enemy and it had sent his forces in a frenzy to ready themselves. He was more than surprised when Madara gave him command of their main force, the Hokage's reasoning being that Tobirama had the mindset to maintain order in the midst of battle, while Madara was a leader who liked to tear through enemy lines with sheer force and unimaginable speed. When presented with an argument like that and how well it fit into their strategy, Tobirama had found no reason to deny Madara's idea. Certainly not when the Uchiha had actually agreed to go forward with Tobirama's battle strategy. Tobirama felt the ground beneath his feet tremble, and it was the first sign that something wasn't right. They had information that the enemy general had 6,000 men under his command, with more than half of them being ninjas. But this was something different. Quickly placing his finger on the ground, he allowed his senses to span across the land far and wide. "What's happening out there?" asked Toby Shamura, as he and nearly everyone else felt the trembling of the ground beneath their feet. No small army could cause such shockwaves. It was nightfall and the moon had been hidden behind dark clouds. Thin wisps of snow were falling from the heavens, making the temperature even cooler. Toby Shamura narrowed his eyes when he saw Tobirama pale as he got up from the ground and looked at their men. "Our information was wrong," said the white-haired Senju bitterly, as his fists clenched shut. Before Toby Shamura or any other commanders could ask the Senju another question, they were all silenced when they saw an endless wave emerging from the forests on the other side of the Naka River. "Those crests," whispered Hiro Inuzuka in alarm. None of the other ninja lords missed what the dog warrior was seeing with his own eyes. For there in front of them was an entire army of thousands, and not all of them were civilian fighters. Majority of them bore the armor with emblems of a very feared and hated clan in the ninja world. Kagaya. Tobirama grimaced on watching nearly 3,000 Kagaya standing in front of him, with all of them heavily armed and savage grins on their maniacal faces. But what caught his complete attention was one strange-looking person standing at the front of this army. Unlike the soldiers, he was dressed in shimmering blue armor with an emblem that Tobirama didn't recognize. His hair was long and reached up to his waist, but it was pale like the snow, and so were his eyes. He carried with him no sword or gunbai, but a spear-shaped weapon that was also white. Judging from the way the bloodthirsty Kagayas were not attacking outright and actually deferring to this man for direction only made Tobirama guess the man was the commander and not Isshin Minamoto, who was standing with the remaining few thousand of his civilian soldiers in the rear. Fighting against civilians and minor ninja clans was one thing, but the Kagaya were an enemy on a completely different level. They didn't fear death and only enjoyed murdering till they were killed. They were the most ferocious clan in the world, and even the Uchiha avoided provoking them openly. Even a small force of Kagayas was dangerous for ninjas to face, battling against thousands of those monsters. The king's army shivered when the Kagayas in a uniform fashion started banging their swords against their armored chests while giving out a thunderous battle cry. The roaring continued to get louder and more ferocious with every passing second, and more than one ninja on Tobirama's side trembled as the terrifying sound penetrated each and every cell of their body. It would have continued if not for a single kunai that flew rapidly through the air and in one strike severed the head of a Kagaya warrior from his neck. The roaring of the enemy army stopped as they watched the headless body fall gracelessly at the river bank. Nearly half of the river started to rise up high and high in the air, making the Kagaya warriors take a step back in alarm. A lone warrior in Senju armor stepped out of the forest with a lightning cackling sword in his hand. His eyes were as cold as ice and his one hand was outstretched controlling the rising mass of water. When he looked at the men behind him, they all saw nothing but cold fury in his eyes. "Send these mad animals to hell," roared Tobirama. With that war cry he unleashed the amassed body of water right towards the enemy army. But before it could swarm the Kagayas, that lone pale-haired enemy commander walked forward fearlessly. Tobirama saw veins emerge around the man's eyes and his entire body glowed with pure blue chakra. The strange warrior unleashed a tidal wave of pure chakra from his hands that clashed against the massive river water wave. Steam and boiled weather flew across the riverbank, making many across both armies dive for cover. With the initial attack neutralized, the pale-skinned warrior gave out an unearthly battle cry and pointed his hand right at Tobirama. At once, the Kagayas charged. Tobirama was rooted in his spot as he watched the unknown enemy commander freeze the entire Naka River, allowing the Kagayas to cross without any opposition. At the same time, a dark wave of arrows was unleashed from the rear by Isshin Minamoto and his civilian fighters. Thousands of more battle cries joined the fray as dozens upon dozens of Uchiha charged ahead of Tobirama, forming a protective formation around him. "Fire!" yelled one of the dragons. Immediately all the Uchihas unleashed their own volley of shuriken that soared high in the sky before it multiplied into an even large wave as the kunai were double thanks to the Uchiha shuriken jutsu. With a mighty roar they clashed against the volley of arrows, sending shattered metal pieces raining all over the river bank. Despite the valiant effort, many of the lethal projectiles broke through the defense and several ninjas cried out in pain as they were sent crashing down. While the Uchihas protected their leader, the Inuzuka had charged ahead ferociously with their battle dogs. Their clash against the approaching Kagayas was heard by every man present as body parts and blood was sent flying everywhere. Tobirama saw a large force of Kaguya charging towards him and the Uchihas around him. "Combination," he commanded, thankful that the past week had given them time to at least familiarize their forces in working together. It was not perfect, but at the very least, they would not outright reject his commands. Fire style, Fireball Jutsu. The Uchihas were joined by the Sarutobi warriors as they too unleashed nearly 100 magnificent fireballs at the charging enemy. The enemy savages were not to be intimidated as hundreds of them retaliated in kind with similar attacks. Dozens of men and women on both sides screamed in agony as the volley of fireballs started to be exchanged at a rapid pace, even as a large force of Kagayas clashed madly against the forces commanded by Tobi Shamura. To his credit, the Shamura leader was as vicious as the enemy and mercilessly started slaughtering every single one of his foes. The fearless persona inspired many others to join the fray against the Kaguya. Tobirama grimaced when another volley of arrows was fired by the civilian fighters on the other side of the frozen river. What shocked him was the fact that this barrage rained down mercilessly, killing Tobirama's fighters and Kaguya's both. However, for every Kaguya that died in the friendly fire, 3 more of Tobirama's fighters went down. He was alarmed when one of his civilian commanders was literally pulverized on the spot by the pale-haired enemy commander. The Kagayas on the left flank, led by their commander, was literally butchering every ninja that tried to stop them. Tobirama gripped his sword as he saw his Uchiha allies were preoccupied fighting against the ferocious Kagayas around them. How could you stop an enemy that didn't even bat an eye when you severed their limbs, killed their fellow comrades? The Kagayas were not just madly ferocious, but unlike the allied ninjas who felt pain when they were injured, the mad bastards continued slaughtering and killing everyone around them without pause. For every Kaguya that was falling, 3 of Tobirama's men were the price. The continued barrage of arrows from the civilian forces on the other side only continued to add more casualties. That was when he saw the first silhouettes in the sky. Tobirama couldn't help the savage grin from gracing his own lips as he saw an army of eagles emerge from the nearby mountain. On top of those birds was a figure whose power was felt by every fighter on the battlefield. "Burn them all!" yelled Madara furiously. Rei Namikaze, who was commanding the newly formed aerial corps, gestured her clan's summoning creatures to follow through the order. Mounted on top of the beasts were the most elite fighters of their army, who were now all positioned exactly above the civilian army of Isshin Minamoto. Fire style, Raging Inferno. Madara was joined by nearly 1,000 of his elite forces, who all unleashed the same attack from their mouths. Isshin Minamoto could only give out a terrible scream as he and his entire force were literally set on fire, along with half of the forest on their side. Men screamed in horror and agony as they were burned alive, their skin gilding against their melting armor. Everywhere there was fire and death, with no route of escape. The Hokage unleashed his gunbai in a wide arc, making the raging inferno spread across the entire forest, consuming every living soul on the cursed land. Even the mad Kagayas faltered for a moment when, in front of their very eyes, half of their allies were burned alive. By the time the horror was over, the last of the daimyo loyalists were nothing but ash. Madara jumped from his bird and was soon joined by most of his 1,000 elite ninjas, who all now formed a single line right behind the Kagayas. Rei Namikaze and her clansmen, still mounted on the eagle squadrons, unleashed a devastating volley of explosives, shredding the rear ranks of the Kagayas. However, for the blonde ninja leader, her surprise attack was disrupted when she saw a pure beam of chakra being unleashed from the ground. It tore through the eagle, carrying the Namikaze leader, sending her and the few men with her flying away. Before the allied ninjas could even get over the shock, dozens of more such beams were unleashed, striking several more eagles, sending more and more Namikaze fighters to their deaths. Madara gripped his gunbai fiercely and raised it in the air. His Sharingan was focused on the falling form of Rei Namikaze. Judging from her still form, he could only guess she was injured badly and lost consciousness. Or worse. Regardless of the dire scenario, he threw his famed weapon, watching it sail through the air. Many ninjas on both sides gasped as the hilt of the gunbai connected with Rei's shoulder and carried her straight towards the bark of a tree, where she got stuck thanks to the gunbai lodged in her shoulder. The sound of broken bones was clear to hear, but at the very least her brains were not splattered across the battlefield like the rest of her clansmen, who were not so fortunate to gather Madara's attention. The Hokage grimaced as he realized that one of his best commanders could possibly be dead. Rei had served his family faithfully, and watching her get attacked like that ignited a murderous rage within Madara as he glared at the pale-haired enemy commander who did this to her. "No prisoners!" yelled Madara viciously. Madara unleashed his sword and made a straight line directly towards the one who hurt his friend and allies. A dark smirk graced his lips as the enemy commander calmly walked forward as his Kagaya soldiers broke into two groups. One still battling against Tobarama's forces, the remaining smaller force began their attempts to stop Madara's elite forces. The two armies again clashed in devastating shockwaves, sending limbs, heads and blood flying everywhere. It was a savage massacre. Rage was the only thing running through Madara as he beheaded two Kagayas stupid enough to charge him. He gave a vicious roundhouse kick, sending another dozen flying away. Blocking a horizontal slash from another enemy, he pushed the man back several inches through sheer force before his finely crafted sword broke through the enemy's weapon and buried itself in the shocked Kagaya's neck. For all their savagery and ferocity, the Kagayas felt the superior anger of the wild dragon rain down on them mercilessly. Madara glanced at his sides to see his personal guard make a butchery of any enemy that tried to swarm him. Leading the charge was Makoto herself, and her sword was making a carving out of corpses. Joining her were the Hatake brothers and Danzo, while Shibi Aburame harassed nearby Kagaya warriors through his swarms of bugs. He was brought out of his thoughts when he heard Danzo scream. Looking forward, Madara realized why. Through the fighting, Toby Shamura had managed to find a way to reach the enemy commander. The Shamura leader was swift and precise in his strikes, but his enemy was easily evading the attacks as if he was fighting a child. The dance didn't continue long as the enemy commander made a horizontal slash with his strange weapon and it shattered Toby's sword like it was made of glass. Many of the nearby Shamura warriors desperately jumped in to save their leader, only to see a blur move around them. The enemy commander started rotating, sending large shockwaves of chakra that hit the Shamura warriors brutally. Madara cringed when he literally heard necks snap, heads burst and limbs fly as every Shamura was thrown away. Suddenly the circle of death was stopped, and from its midst the enemy commander emerged to launch a brutal strike that connected with Toby's shoulder, making the man wildly flip in the air before crashing with a bone-crushing thud. The fall must have hurt the Shamura badly as he weakly moved on the ground trying to find his lost sword as his enemy moved in for the final kill, but was forced to jump away when bolts of lightning rained around the position he was standing a moment ago. Tobarama stepped between the enemy commander with his lightning sword in his hand as several Aburame dragged the Shamura clan head away from the battlefield. Madara was quick to join the Senju as they both now blared at the enemy commander, who stared at them without a flinch. "That's a dojutsu," warned Madara, gesturing towards the enemy's pale white eyes. "I figured as much. The fact that not a single strike has managed to hit him makes me believe it allows him to see in all directions," suggested Tobarama. "Never thought I'd face someone like that, certainly not with a Senju by my side," said Madara with a smirk. "How about facing a common enemy with an ally?" asked Tobarama with a small grin, earning a tiny nod of respect from Madara. "I could live with that," agreed Madara. "Together?" asked Tobarama finally. "Let's dance, Senju." Madara charged forward swiftly with Tobarama right by his side. The enemy commander flexed his stance as the two arch-rivals closed in on him. When Madara tried to attack the man's legs with his sword, he was shocked to see his sword shatter to pieces when the spear-shaped weapon of the enemy blocked the move. The same weapon was instantly raised upward to skewer the stunned dragon until the attack was blocked by Tobarama's lightning sword. For the first time, an emotion akin to shock passed through the pale-eyed enemy commander, and he howled in agony when Tobarama sent lightning coursing through the locked weapons, hitting the man with several lightning sparks. Madara, taking advantage of the opening, moved to subdue the enemy but was forced to battle several Kagayas who madly jumped in between to protect their leader. They soon found out they had jumped to their doom. Madara grabbed the punch of the first opponent and twisted the limb before punching his chakra-coated arm right through the shocked Kagaya's armor. Before the dead man could even hit the ground, the Uchiha leader had already grabbed another Kagaya, slapped an explosive seal on his chest before throwing him at his comrades, ending them all in vicious explosion. Tobarama also moved forward, slicing through Kagaya's left and right, his lightning sword Raijin no Ken carving through their armor like butter. So engrossed was he in his battle that he didn't see the surprise attack. Madara watched Tobarama howl in pain when the pale-eyed enemy commander emerged again, only to land a swift strike to Tobarama's sword arm. The lightning sword fell to the ground as Tobarama's entire arm went limp, and the Senju felt another palm strike heading towards his chest. Considering the fact that he just lost all feeling in his right arm made him brutally aware that if that blow landed, he was as good as dead. With his last reflexes he dodged the lethal blow, however it still connected with his leg, making him fall to his knees. To his relief, Madara picked up Raijin no Ken and sent a lightning shockwave that was blocked at the last moment by the enemy commander as he performed his lethal rotation technique. The Hokage saw with his Sharingan that the chakra nodes in Tobirama's right arm were blocked and damaged. Same was the case with his leg, which made him glare hatefully at the enemy commander, who looked at them calmly. "You cannot avoid fate," whispered the strange man for the first time. "Who are you?" demanded Madara, receiving a pitying look from the strange man. However, the man was surprised when he watched Tobirama actually stand back on his feet with great pain. "Impossible. You bloody worm. I will end you right here," warned Tobirama murderously, as he unleashed his entire killing intent, making dozens of Kagayas fall to their knees. The enemy commander frowned and gritted his teeth on seeing the endless rage in Tobirama's eyes. Despite his wounds, the Senju was standing defiantly. Even Madara was stunned at the display of power. "Theirs is the fury." The Hokage wordlessly handed over the Senju his sword, and an unsaid message was exchanged among them. Both men lost track of the fighting around them, and soon enough Madara unleashed his entire killing intent, making every fighter tremble as the combined rage of Uchiha and Senju spread across the battlefield. Madara charged forward, getting close to the enemy commander, and sent a strike towards his solar plexus. The pale-eyed bastard saw the move coming and sent his own left palm, but before it could connect with Madara's arm, the Uchiha twisted himself out of the way and sent a swift kick aimed at the enemy's ribs, which was unfortunately blocked by the opponent through one of his own legs. "He's strong." Madara was forced to go on the defensive when his enemy closed in on him, sending a flurry of palm strikes at maddening speeds. If not for his Sharingan, Madara would have been reduced to a pinch cushion, but thankfully he had his famed Dojutsu that allowed him to see the attacks coming, and with years of battle experience, he was able to dodge the attacks at the last second. Even as he fought for his life, from the corner of his eyes he saw Tobirama give him a subtle nod. Deciding to trust the Senju on this gamble, Madara swiftly deactivated his Sharingan and closed his eyes before jumping away. Lightning style, heavenly flash. Tobirama's entire body was submerged in a nova of white lightning that soon exploded across the entire battlefield, rendering every fighter blind. Many screamed, but one yell was most painful than any other. When Madara opened his eyes again, he saw the enemy commander howling in agony, trying to shield his bleeding eyes. He grabbed the holy sword that Tobirama threw at him before flashing right behind the stunned enemy commander. Raijin no Ken sliced through the man's armor before plunging into his chest. The strange man screamed in horror and unbearable pain, whirling around to deliver a brutal palm strike to Madara's armored chest, sending the Uchiha crashing away. Whirling unstably, he started marching towards Madara blindly as men started to back away after already seeing what the warrior was capable of. Madara coughed blood but painfully managed to get back on his feet and prepared himself for another fight, only to see Tobirama flash behind the stunned enemy and grabbing the plunged sword. Raijin no Ken emancipated another blinding nova of light, rendering most fighters to cover their eyes. But they all heard the inhuman scream, and when they finally managed to regain their vision, the Kagayas were stunned to watch their commander dissolve into ash. Tobirama coughed blood and fell to his knees, the effects of the fight taking a toll on his body. With great struggle he grabbed a kunai with his only functioning hand to fend off the pissed-off Kagayas closing in on him. To his surprise, Madara again came to his rescue, and again Tobirama was reminded of the fact that crossing Madara Uchiha was a bad idea. With their commander lost, the Kagayas lost all sense of coordination and started attacking anything and anyone. Madara's personal guard stepped deeper into the battle and rallied the scattered allied ninjas. Long minutes of savagery and killing passed, but soon enough the Kagayas were cornered with allied ninjas surrounding them on all sides. Tori Yamanaka was smart enough to trap the ferocious warriors in a barrier. Madara stared at the remaining 900 enemy ninjas that were desperately trying to break through. Never once did he see in their eyes the desire to surrender which made him arrive at his decision. He gestured to Tori Yamanaka, who nodded in consent, cementing Madara's resolve. With a dark grin, he looked at his clansmen. "Uchihas, give them fire and blood," commanded Madara, and watched in satisfaction as his clansmen stepped all over the barrier's edges. If the Kagayas had any brain cell in their heads, they would have formed a defense formation and fought as one, which could have given them a chance of survival a little longer. However, when the barrier dropped, the savage warriors tried to charge out, only to hear the last words of their life. "Fire style, pits of hell." The Uchihas unleashed a tsunami of fire from their mouths that formed a raging inferno, trapping the Kagaya warriors. Many tried to jump over but were cut down by precise kunai strikes of Sarutobi and Shimura ninjas. Slowly the inferno started to close and burning many Kagayas in its path, yet the allied ninjas were again to be shocked. Stepping over the piling mass of corpses, the last of the Kagayas used the chance to jump over the inferno and try to take out as many enemies. Many exploded themselves with the help of explosive tags, taking out dozens of Madara's ninjas in a flash. Few even tried to take out the Hokage but were mercilessly cut down by Madara's personal guard. The inferno had trapped the last few hundred Kagaya so thoroughly that now there was no chance of escape. Still there was defiance and never-ending bloodlust burning in their mad eyes. Instead of begging for mercy, they huddled closer to each other and grasped their hands. Many allied ninjas including Madara took this as a last act of their enemies choosing to die together. Tobirama however felt the disaster that was coming. Madara! Seal them off now dash! The Senju couldn't finish his warning as he was sent flying away courtesy of an explosion akin to a miniature Baijidama that erupted from the middle of the inferno. Everything went silent. After what felt like an eternity, Tobirama groggily regained the first of his senses. His head was throbbing, many of his muscles were screaming in agony, and he definitely felt his leg was broken. When he first tried to open his eyes, all he saw were dark blurs, but he didn't give up. After several failed attempts, he finally managed to look at the sky only to see it covered in dark smoke. Rubbing his eyes, he managed to make himself sit upright and gingerly raised his only functioning hand to see something land on his palm. His breath stopped when he realized it was not the dark smoke that he had seen in the sky, but ashes. Horrified and alarmed, Tobirama wildly glanced around only to see a massive crater now present on their side of the riverbank. It was at least 30 feet long and another 50 in depth. It was then Tobirama heard the moans and screams. He felt something inside of him snap when he saw thousands of allied ninjas lying all over the battlefield. Half of them were so badly burnt or had parts missing that they were not even recognizable. Those who had survived soon discovered death would have been better as many were missing limbs, eyes, and many other vital body parts. Tobirama heard another blood-curdling scream and saw Kakashi Hatake being desperately held back by Danzo and Makoto. The reason for the boy's grief made bile rise in Tobirama's throat. In order to save their sworn leader, Ken Hatake had valiantly placed himself between Madara and the suicidal chakra explosion unleashed by the Kagayas as their final act of vengeance. In doing so, the now heavily bleeding Hokage was saved, and so were Ken's comrades. But, despite being a veteran of hundreds of battles, Tobirama had never seen a sight that he was seeing tonight, and one which made him vomit the last of his meal on the ground. For in front of him where once stood the eldest son and heir of Tsukumo Hatake was a badly burned skeleton that was still standing in a self-sacrificing manner between himself and Madara. Every inch of skin, flesh, clothes and armor had been vaporized, leaving only a husk behind. A husk which soon turned to ash, making any trace of Ken Hatake disappear from the world forever. Tobirama felt his resolve break as he saw nearly a quarter of their army was utterly wiped out. Another large contingent of ninjas were so badly wounded that he doubted they would ever be able to fight again. Those that had managed to survive this devastating battle were numb with shock, horror and pain at what they just went through. As the last of his strength faded away and darkness circled his vision, Tobirama fell to the ground once again. His mind was so numb and his heart was still unable to believe what he just witnessed. As the last of his vision faded away, he saw 4 figures with pale white eyes watching them from the forest across the other side of the riverbank. Chapter 26. The Choice. 2 weeks earlier, Mito Uzumaki had a radiant smile on her face, and she was one of thousands cheering wildly as they watched the whirlpool banner of their clan being unfurled on top of the city hall. Her eyes shed out a single tear as she watched a young man of 24 years of age smile as he placed the flag claiming the lost city back for their people. Just like the rest of her clan, the man had bright red hair with one long bang covering his right eye, but it only made him look more mysterious. His blue eyes were shining with pride and confidence, something which their people desperately needed to achieve this victory after nearly 3 months of brutal fighting and constant defeats. Her heart ached for her youngest brother, who was one of the many who were not here to see this day. Her only solace was the fact that her eldest and only surviving brother, heir of Yuzu, and future leader of the Uzumaki, had given them the victory they needed. Nagato Uzumaki had always been wilder and braver than his sister and brother. It was his steadfast leadership that gave the Uzumaki the courage to face an enemy that wanted them killed to the last man. Even when his youngest brother Nahiro was killed and their people suffered another defeat, Nagato Uzumaki did not give up and continued fighting, which inspired the Uzumaki to do the same despite all the odds against them. Until yesterday, out of their 7 great islands, they had lost all except their capital of Yuzushi-Ogakure. Their small villages were lost, their cities burned, their people died by the thousands. Yuzu's existence as a nation itself was at the verge of extinction. Their economy was shattered, a large part of their population was dead, food was getting scarce, but most of all there was no sign of anyone coming to their aid. The only reason they had even survived this long was the fact that the Uzumaki had close to 25,000 ninjas and civilian fighters in their ranks. Now barely half of those ninjas were still alive. Still, Mito could not help but be proud of her eldest brother who reclaimed this island and pushed out the abominations holding this holy city. A city she had lost. Her defeat was not because of her cowardice, but for the fact that she barely had 1/10 of the men their enemy brought with them. She tried to buy as much time and resist for as long as she could, but when all seemed lost, instead of sacrificing precious fighting men, she ordered a retreat to their capital city, if only to regain their strength. The plan worked, and soon enough her eldest brother mustered their forces and led the assault that gave them this victory. It wouldn't have been possible had she sacrificed the 1,000 men under her command needlessly. Still, the men had rallied and fought valiantly when they saw the future heir of their clan lead the assault. Nagato! 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 Mito laughed on seeing their clan warriors yelling her brother's name at the top of their lungs. Nagato gave a winning smile as he held the flying Uzumaki banner in his hand. This city was once the holy land of our people. A place of worship, faith, and devotion. And from today it shall be great once again, declared Nagato proudly, and was deafened by the approving roars. Let those monsters know this. Never shall any Uzumaki bend to their will, promised Nagato, to another round of cheers. Here I declare, the city of Hirashiman reclaimed. Nagato unleashed his sword and Mito could not help but feel hope surge in her own heart as her brother raised his sword victoriously in the air. For Uzu, Mito and every one of her clansmen could not resist unleashing their own swords in cheers and yell at the top of their lungs. For Uzu, for Uzu, for Uzu, for Uzu, for Uzu. Mito waited as her brother made his way through their clansmen. For the first time in months, their people were smiling and cheering. There was a faint shimmer of hope in their eyes as they congratulated and cheered their future clan leader. The men have found their captain. Pride surged through her as he came towards her, and wordlessly, they both embraced each other. Quite the speech, teased Mito, earning an infectious grin from her brother. Remember today, little sister. Today is the first of our victories, with many more to come, boasted Nagato. Mito looked at him and could not help but want to believe in him. She knew as long as their people had Nagato to lead them, there was still hope. Her brother was a fine ninja adept in ninjutsu, kenjutsu, huinjutsu, and taijutsu. Traits keenly desired among their clan leaders. Mito, on the other hand, was someone who preferred diplomacy over battle. That was not to say she could not defend herself or their people. She was the finest fuinjutsu master of their nation after her father. Even so, she knew that perhaps she would not have been able to take this city back from the enemy, unlike Nagato. She had tried her best to hold it for as long as possible, but when her youngest brother Nahiro was killed, she realized the battle was lost and she had to consolidate her forces. Her attention returned back to reality when she noticed their people already breaking barrels of sake and food. It would seem the party was about to start, and knowing her people, it was going to be quite a wild night. They deserve it, advised Nagato, and she could not find any reason to object. Her gaze caught sight of a very familiar man approaching towards them both. The crowd instantly parted, with each person bowing and offering a respectful greeting to the man. Not that he deserved any less, for Ayato Uzumaki was a feared and respected leader. There he is. Yuzu's finest, my son and heir, said Ayato proudly, as he approached towards Nagato with a beaming smile on his wrinkled face. Despite his old age, his red hair had not lost their shine and he could still be a force on the battlefield. Nagato might be a good leader, but it was Ayato's firm command that prevented any of their people from breaking down or doing something foolish. Nagato gave a strained smile as he saw his father approaching. His relationship with the man was complicated at best. Granted, Ayato had provided for his children and governed their nation excellently. However, the same man had barely paid any attention or even showed interest in the upbringing of his younger children and focused all his attention on Nagato's development into the leader their people would need when Ayato was gone. Some might believe it to be right, but Nagato had watched his younger siblings struggle desperately for this man's approval only to be mocked at worst and told to do better at best. His brother died trying to hold this city, knowing how disappointed their father would be if it was lost. Thankfully, Mito had enough sense to not order her remaining fighters to die needlessly and came back to their nation's capital. It allowed Nagato to muster his forces, and in a surprise attack, they took the city back. He remembered how severely their father had lambasted Mito. He blamed her for not only losing their holy city but also for the death of Nihiro. Nagato had never forgotten or forgiven his father for the tears that Mito had shed after hearing such cruelty. If only their mother was not killed by the mountain clans. Still, they were in public and it was best if their people didn't see any friction in their leadership. Nagato hugged his father, and even if he didn't like the man very much, Ayato was extremely proud of him. It could even be said his father loved him more than he ever loved Mito or Nihiro. The men say you were a force on the battlefield. That you single-handedly trapped those bastards, said Ayato proudly. Mito was the one who erected barriers across the city and cut off the enemy reinforcements. I was able to achieve this victory because of her, father pointed Nagato, his fists clenched when the old man glanced at his daughter with a grim look. At least, you did something right for once, daughter. But if not for you, this city would never have been lost. I was reluctant to give you command, but when Nagato insisted, I could not resist. I commanded you to hold this city to death, yet you abandoned it and got your brother killed, said Ayato disappointedly. I tried, father. I can never forgive myself for not being able to save my brother, but I will not apologize for trying to save the lives of our people against certain death, replied Mito sadly, but her firm gaze was enough to make the old man see her thoughts clearly. You're too soft, Mito scolded Ayato with a heavy frown. Father, warned Nagato, making Ayato realize that many of their people had stopped their festivities and were now trying to see what was the problem between their lord's family. Ayato sighed before looking at his brave son with a determined look in his eyes. Reluctantly, he had to gesture Mito to follow after him as Nagato did the same. Ayato took his children towards one of the broken watchtowers, and when he was certain they were alone, he looked at the ruin that was Hirashiman. We need to get back our remaining islands. We need to push the enemy out of our nation now that we have fate on our side. The men are in good spirits and they have you, Nagato. I want you to recapture Naga Island next, commanded Ayato seriously. For all their differences, Mito knew her brothers shared their father's feelings when it came to their strategy to survive this invasion. But before Nagato could reply to that order, she coughed lightly, making both men look at her. What is it, Mito? Asked Ayato impatiently. She hid her own sadness on not being even given a proper chance to speak her thoughts. The only reason she was even allowed this luxury was because of Nagato's presence, and the last thing Ayato wanted was to offend his prized son. All her life, she had only been a daughter to her father. Someone whom he could use for their clan's benefit, nothing more. And she had accepted her fate. Family, duty, honor. Those were their family's words, and Mito had tried her best to live her life on the basis of those principles. Father, you have seen their numbers. You have seen what those monsters are capable of. We cannot afford to lose more men in retaking our lost islands. Cities can be rebuilt. What we need to do is consolidate our forces on Yuzu and Hirashiman. We hold them here, suggested Mito, earning a scoff from her father. So you suggest allowing a foreign enemy to rape and pillage our nation? Yuzu is well defended. No army has ever broken through our barriers. Hirashiman shall also have a decent garrison to hold it against any further incursions, but the majority of our forces led by your brother will take back our lost islands. I know what my country needs, and Nagato knows our lands better than those monsters. Your brother has never disappointed me before. I cannot say the same for you, replied Ayato harshly, and didn't miss Nagato flinch while Mito took in a deep breath. Then we are doomed, father. We cannot win this war, much less survive it. Those monsters are not interested in our cities, wealth, or hidden jutsu. They want to kill us all, warned Mito. She bristled when Ayato slammed his fist against the wall, and the sheer ferocity in his eyes made her gulp nervously. If we are to die, then we shall do so defending our nation. Every last Uzumaki man, woman and child will fight tooth and nail, and before our end comes, we'll make those bastards pay dearly in blood, promised Ayato bitterly. Maybe we should again send messages for aid. If it could save our people, father proposed Nagato, earning a tired sigh from the Uzumaki leader. And who will answer our call for aid? Sanjus? Fire Daimyo? No, my son, our allies have forsaken us. The old alliances between Senju and Uzumaki are no more. We are all alone, whispered Ayato gravely. Mito could not deny that her father was right in this matter at least. Words couldn't describe how disappointed and shocked the Uzumaki were when all their calls for aid went unanswered. Neither Hashirama or the Fire Daimyo sent help, they didn't even send a message. Granted, there was a civil war going on at that time in the Land of Fire, but still, in their time of need their allies had deserted them. But her people couldn't survive anymore without aid. In her desperation, she could only see one way: the Dragon King shall answer. The incredulous look she received from her father and brother made her nearly want to grimace, but she held her ground. They might think her insane for even suggesting getting aid from an Uchiha, but the bitter truth was the fact that Naruto Uchiha had the power to save the Uzumaki. Dragon King? You're proposing getting aid from a damn Uchiha? Asked Nagato in disbelief. I've heard a few things about this boy king. They say he is just and loyal. But where was King Naruto when the enemy invaded our nation? Where was King Naruto when our people were butchered by the thousands? Where was King Naruto when my son Dash? Ayato stopped himself when he noticed the sadness in the eyes of his children as they were reminded of their lost brother. They both were young, and it was why they didn't understand the way shinobi were in reality. Let her go to him. Both Mito and Ayato blinked on hearing what Nagato just suggested. What? Asked Ayato in surprise. He certainly had not expected such madness from his son. I've received intel that King Naruto marches with a large army to fight against the samurai nation. Mito knows diplomacy better than either of us, father. If she can convince him to come to our aid, it could save the lives of many of our people, explained Nagato honestly. Her? Questioned Ayato skeptically. Yes, said Nagato firmly, staring right into his father's eyes, making the old man sigh again. What makes you think he'll come to our aid? Even if he does, it won't be for free, said Ayato bitterly. I don't know, father. It is very likely he'll ask us to bend the knee and accept his rule. He sent us an offer before and you rejected it. But back then we had a huge army, now half of those warriors are gone and we are surrounded. We need help, suggested Mito honestly. Lose our independence? Are you out of your mind? Yelled Ayato furiously. It is better than being dead, father. Or worse, whispered Nagato reluctantly. Even if we miraculously survive this war, it is very likely the mountain clans will try to take advantage of our weakness. We have lost many good fighters, our cities and islands are in ruin, our supplies are low. Isolation is no longer possible, we have to join the king if we wish for the Uzumaki to have a safe future, insisted Mito passionately. All she had were good words about the new king, and it was true she was blindly hoping for many impossible things. But hope was all she had left. Even a stubborn man like Ayato could see the harsh reality that awaited their people. For all his pride, Ayato was not a foolish man. I have no hope in this matter, but do what you can, Mito. Your brother seems to trust you despite all your failures. Try not to fail your last brother, whispered Ayato bitterly, before he walked away. Nagato embraced his sister as soon as their father was out of sight. He felt her shudder in his arms and knew very well how much she loved that man despite his cruelty and negligence. Stay strong, little sister. For our people. Mito stared at the retreating form of her homeland from her ship. She waved a final goodbye to her brother and he returned the gesture. She could not see his face clearly from the distance, but in her heart, she knew as long as Nagato lived, Yuzu would never fall. However, it didn't change the fact that their people needed help desperately and she was now responsible for getting them that aid. No matter the cost. All she had with herself were a handful of warriors that would serve as her guard, but if the Dragon King wanted her taken hostage, then he could do so very easily. Yet she had hope in her heart. Few of their people who had returned from the mainlands to defend their nation had nothing but praise for the new king. He was young but fair and honorable. Most of all, he had the strongest Biju of the world serving him. She could only imagine the power of that beast on the battlefield. It might just be enough to save her people. Mito didn't know how she would be able to convince Naruto Uchiha to set aside his own war to fight hers. But if she didn't succeed, then this might very well be the last time she saw her homeland and dear brother. Present day. Tsunade was awakened when she heard a strangled gasp from her side. She was surprised when she saw her husband was wide awake in their bed. His eyes were wide and utterly terrified, his bare chest sporting several beads of sweat, and his forehead was the same. She gently touched his cheek and looked compassionately at him. "Another one?" she asked. He wordlessly nodded and didn't resist when she stroked his hair affectionately. "What did you see this time?" she asked gently. "Many things. Horrible things, a three-headed dragon, a sea of darkness, a woman with eyes as pale as snow, a man who looked like an older version of myself only with dark black hair, and a child born in fire and blood," he whispered worriedly. She raised her eyebrow at the last revelation because it was not something he had ever dreamed of before. His other visions were jaded and utterly confusing to say the least. She was inclined to dismiss his dreams as after effects of lack of sleep due to the hectic march, but she had been there when Naruto revealed his dreams to his Biju friend. Never had she seen a monster like the Kyuubi pale and be rendered speechless like that. If these dreams unnerved someone inhuman and monstrous like the fox, then it worried her too, because somehow, they all came back to her husband. Even her own insecurities regarding him and Makoto felt shallow in comparison to what trouble plagued Naruto, and she tried her best to be there for him. He still looked lost in his thoughts, making her place a soft kiss on his lips. His eyes found hers, but she didn't look away. It had taken her a while, but she soon discovered that with him words were not necessary to offer comfort or even seek it. A strange phenomenon, but not one she couldn't help but like. Knowing that they were going to face a great battle only seemed to bring them closer together, and she was glad for it as it helped reassure her doubts. Shursui had even suggested that a part of Naruto would always love Makoto. She had been surprised that the boy even knew what was going on between his two friends, but he had simply smiled and said those two had not been as discreet as they imagined. But the new commander of the Kingsguard, an elite force of 7,000 warriors, had also suggested that a part of Naruto's heart was warming up to Tsunade. It had given her hope. Naruto watched her as she was lost in her own thoughts. As time passed, she had defied his doubts and tried her best to be there for him and support him. Tsunade didn't call him a lunatic when he revealed his dark dreams to her. Considering the madness Uchiha were prone to develop, she had taken this turn in his life far better than he had ever expected. He knew she didn't understand what was happening to him despite her dearest wish to do so, yet that was enough to make him see that she was someone whom he could trust fully. With everything. "Tsunade," he called her gently, making her look at him curiously. "What is it?" she asked, and didn't miss the nervousness in his eyes. "The men found a hot spring in a cave deep within the forest. Considering that we might not get such leisure time in the future, I was thinking I would love to go. Just the two of us," she requested with a beaming smile, eliciting a faint smile on his own lips. "As my queen wishes," he replied happily. Giving her one last kiss on the lips, he was about to leave the bed when she grasped his wrist, making him stare back at her. She was biting her lip, which was a clear sign that either she was nervous or wanted to say something that she didn't think would be to his liking. He gently squeezed her hand, making her sigh in relief and look at him gratefully. "I know our marriage was not what either of us planned for or expected. But the time that we have spent together has at least made one thing clear to me. I don't regret it," she confessed, honesty and sincerity clearly visible in her dazzling hazel orbs. If he had not developed the ability to control his emotions, he might have shed a joyful tear on hearing those precious words from her. But since he couldn't do that, he decided to confess something that he had also realized as he spent more time with her. "I know sometimes I am distant from you. It was because I didn't know how you'd react to the way I live or my actions in past. But you proved me wrong, and there is no doubt remaining in my heart now. I trust you," he confessed. Her eyes widened on hearing him say that. Naruto was not someone who would say anything lightly or on a whim. Most of his actions were always well thought out and came from the heart. She was about to speak when he cut her off. "There is something that I have kept from you. Something that I couldn't trust you with before," he confessed, guilt and shame clearly visible on his face. "And you trust me with it now?" asked Tsunade, unable to hide her slight disappointment over his deception. "I don't regret what I did, and it was never my intention to hurt anyone with my actions, especially you." I want you to know that he insisted, looking right into her eyes, and she knew he was yet again speaking from his heart. And you want to tell me this secret in that cave, don't you? Asked Tsunade knowingly. He was surprised by how quickly she realized his plan, but then again, she had great wits apart from her beauty. If she realized this much, then he knew that she understood why he was choosing to reveal his greatest secret to her in an isolated cave rather than in the midst of their army camp surrounded by thousands of soldiers and ninja lords. Yet he still had hope, for instead of lashing out at him for keeping any secret from her, Tsunade was trying to be patient and understanding. Shursui might have had a hand in that, considering he was the one who was making the queen familiar with the Uchiha way of life and introducing little bits of Naruto's past which she didn't know about. For that he was grateful both to his friend and his wife. Yes, he said honestly. She was silent for a moment and he could not miss the doubts and fear in her eyes. Yet she pushed those negative emotions back and looked back at him seriously. Very well. Whoever considered Naruto to be a less cunning man had surely never experienced how skillfully the king could make them dance to his whims. Tsunade could not help but agree with that thought process as she contentedly sat in the beautiful and relaxing hot springs. There was bare minimum light in the cave and the air was a mix of hot and cold. Deep fog shrouded most of the area, yet it was not so thick enough that she could miss the naked form of the king sitting on her opposite side. The lukewarm water relaxed each and every nerve of her body, relieving a week's worth of fast travel. Her nerves were tingling pleasantly and she felt she could remain here forever. It also served to make her less focused on whatever secret Naruto kept hidden from her. You planned this very well, she said frankly. But her tone wasn't accusing, even so it made him flinch. I was trying to find the best way to reveal the truth to you, he confessed sheepishly. Quite the diplomatic answer, my king. There might just be hope for you yet. Teased Tsunade with a playful smirk dancing on her lips. His own eyebrows twitched and she saw him fight back the grin that wanted to break across his own handsome face. But he controlled his emotions as he steeled himself and came near her. Tsunade moaned lustfully when he pressed his lips to hers. Unlike their past exploits, this kiss was less fierce but full of passion. She could feel him dearly trying to reassure her as he explored her mouth, sending waves of pleasures throughout her entire body. Her body was already relaxed and aroused thanks to the hot springs, and she felt stars flash before her eyes when his chakra-coated hands gently squeezed her breasts. She trembled in his embrace and gave a silent scream between their kiss as she came really hard. He held her firmly as her legs were barely able to handle her weight as every muscle in them was turned to water. Her vision was blurry and her heart was beating at a pace she never experienced before. She was panting firmly, and if not for his repeated and gentle strokes on her naked back, she would have lost all sense of her surroundings. Bastard, she cursed without any heat in her voice, making him chuckle and kiss her cheek affectionately. I told you I would give you pleasure every time after our first night together. I'm just keeping my promise, he whispered cheekily, and despite her closed eyes, she could already imagine that smug, victorious, and cheeky smile plastered on that face of his. Naruto chuckled loudly when she gave him a playful punch to the ribs before pushing him roughly into the water. She was quick to dive in after him, and soon enough they were both fighting for control over the other. Their little spar being a mix of kissing, light punches, playful biting, and even an occasional spank to the ass. He didn't know how long they continued wrestling like that, but it was enough to make him laugh and give him the reassurance he desperately needed. By the time they were done, it was not just him who was ready to reveal the truth. But Tsunade was also calm enough to listen. Tell me, she whispered seriously, her hazel eyes staring at his own as her hands caressed his chest. It's now or never. He took a deep breath before losing himself in his memories as he remembered the past. Already it felt so long ago that he had met Shizuka. It felt like another lifetime. So much had happened since then. The Uchiha and Senju had united, the daimyo was overthrown, he lost Makoto, being chosen king, marrying Tsunade, and now the War of Conquest. Had it already been barely 6 months since he last saw Shizuka? Gods, he might become a father sooner than he expected. When he saw Tsunade still waiting for him, he knew he had to take a plunge into that dark valley and hope for the best. Before I met you, before the peace, I did something, began Naruto carefully. Go on, she reassured him. It was after I put down the Yamanaka rebellion once and for all. To make sure they didn't take up arms against my people ever again, I burned their leader alive and made them watch. It was something which I had to do, but also left me shaken. Like you, I also didn't believe much in the gods, but something inside me snapped and I needed to find an anchor or lose myself to the madness many in my clan have succumbed to in the past, he explained honestly. It's totally normal, for all my anger I cannot think I'll ever be able to do what you did. Even for my people, said Tsunade hesitantly, earning a grim nod from her husband. And I pray that you never have to. The burden of command is not easy to bear for anyone, it tests you in ways you could have never dreamed of. Where every action you take has to be thought of from all angles unless you make a mistake and innocence pay for that in blood. To find that peace again, I went to the temple of Amaterasu of the Nadeshia clan, confessed Naruto. Tsunade got a sinking feeling in her gut on hearing that. She was well aware of what that clan of only female warriors and priestess were famous for, and judging from the way Naruto looked nervous, she was not going to like the rest of the tale one bit. Even so, she had to know, so she gave him the consenting nod. There I met a priestess named Shizuka who helped me in finding that peace. One thing led to another and he left it unsaid. Tsunade grimaced as she realized what had happened between Naruto and the priestess. Were you with Makoto together during that time? She asked hesitantly, and was very much relieved when he shook his head. Not exactly. I mean, we were teasing each other all the time, but we had not committed to anything at that point. It was only after I returned that Makoto and I decided to give it a shot. Reassured Naruto. And why does your actions with Shizuka matter? She's your past, just like Makoto, and I cannot hold you guilty for having sex or relationships, said Tsunade honestly, and frowned when he pursed his lips for a moment before revealing the truth that left her speechless. What if that led to the creation of an unborn child? Tsunade paled and her hand on his chest stopped its caressing motion. She knew he was anxiously looking at her, waiting to hear her say something. But she couldn't do that. The hard and bitter truth that there was a woman currently carrying his child in her belly left her paralyzed. It changed everything, be it the alliance that was formed, their marriage, and the rest of their lives. Most of all, he knowingly kept this secret from her and the Senju along with their allies. Who knows about this? She whispered, still looking at the water and not at him. The Kyubi, Madara, and you, he confessed. She looked at him in disbelief and felt her own emotions go for another frantic spin. The fox was a dear friend of Naruto, and she knew how much Naruto loved his brother. It made sense that he told them of this, but to think he kept this from Taijima? Naori? His friends? Mikoto? Even the Uchiha and their allies? That's why you sued for peace so fiercely. For your child, realized Tsunade, as he nodded hesitantly. I did. And they are probably twins girls if Shizuka's medics are correct. Tsunade grasped her forehead as she felt a painful headache spreading through her brain. Nothing could have ever prepared her for a life-changing truth like this, and she was desperately trying to find an anchor to hold on to. But unlike Naruto, who found that anchor in Shizuka, Tsunade didn't have anyone in this moment. Please say something, Tsunade, he pleaded, and she could not miss the desperation in his voice. When she finally looked up at him, he flinched on seeing the burning anger and hurt in her eyes. You shouldn't have kept this from me, or my family at least. Do you know what you have done? Asked Tsunade bitterly, and was surprised when he glared back at her. I didn't know how you all would react to this. It could have probably destroyed any chance for peace and plunged us all into a never-ending war. I did what I thought was right, argued Naruto fiercely. She jabbed her finger painfully into his chest and looked at him even more furiously. Maybe. But it was selfish, and you know that. Did you even think how my family and their allies would react when they discovered the truth? You created a peace on the foundation of a massive lie. If people discover the truth, and in time they will, because nothing stays secret in this world for eternity, there will be many who will feel betrayed. I feel betrayed, she yelled, as she pushed herself away from him. When he tried to reach her, she gave him a scathing look that stopped him dead in his tracks. I understand your need to protect your children, but by trying to do so you have placed the lives of thousands of other children at risk. Tobirama will kill you and your entire family when he learns of this, said Tsunade in alarm. He wanted to argue against her, to make her understand how this revelation could have neutralized any chance for peace or sent them all into an unknown future. But he couldn't, because deep down he had always known how the Senjus and Tsunade herself would react when they learned that he kept such an important secret from them. He was no ordinary man, but a king. His daughters through Shizuka would be princesses, because there was no way he would abandon them to their fate. It directly threatened the future of the children he would have with Tsunade. Ninjas have gone to war for petty feuds. For an important threat like this, they would probably go for a genocide. Hashirama and Itama could probably be pacified, but there were many like Tobirama and his allies who just wanted a chance to rebel. And he had given them the perfect reason to do so. "I made a mistake," he whispered sadly. How could he have been so delusional in hoping the Senjus would accept this? It was a fool's wish and he had fell for it completely. "You are king now, Naruto. Every action of yours have grave consequences." Her sharp words only made him feel worse, but he knew he deserved it, so kept his silence until another question came to his heart. "What will you do?" he asked worriedly. She paced restlessly across the hot spring, sending ripples everywhere. The irony was that watching those ripples only made him realize even more how this could destroy everything they had built. "I don't know. We are barely 16 and are already rulers of an entire nation. We are fighting a war by uniting ninja clans that have fought each other for thousands of years," confessed Tsunade in panic. Tsunade dash. "Don't!" He felt as if someone had given him a painful slap as he watched the raw fury in her eyes, and it unnerved him, for he had never seen her like this before. Looking into her fierce eyes made him wonder whether she would kill him right here or do something worse. "How could you lie to us all like that, Naruto?" she asked disappointedly. "I'm sorry," he whispered, knowing it was not enough. "I cannot fault you for having an unplanned child, but the truth is that you kept this from not just my family but yours as well. You have betrayed them all and placed everyone's life at risk," lamented Tsunade. He was alarmed when she started to march towards the shore of the hot spring. "Tsunade!" She looked at him and probably saw his fear and panic. She wished she could reassure him, but she couldn't. "It's best if we maintain distance for a while. I'll be heading back to the supply camp in our rear lines and take charge. It would not raise much suspicion, since everyone would probably think it is a safe choice not to plunge both the king and queen into a dangerous battle and lose them both. My brothers would not question my choice either," she decided, surprising him with the fact that despite all her anger and betrayed emotion she could still think up of something intelligent like this. "Will you tell your brothers?" he asked hesitantly, and saw her clench her fists. "I don't know. I have never lied to them before, but I will do what I can not to endanger those children and Shizuka. They are innocent, but not everyone would see that. That is all I can give you right now, Naruto," she whispered sadly. Hearing her say that relieved and unnerved him at the same time. He was glad to know that she was not the type of person who would bring her wrath down on Shizuka and her unborn children for his mistakes, but if Tsunade ever told her brothers about this. She walked away before he could say anything, and for the first time in his life, Naruto experienced a feeling he had not experienced in a long time. He was terrified. By the time Naruto and his friends entered the command tent, it was mid-afternoon. However, they were all surprised to find it already occupied. None were surprised to see Hashirama Senju or Naori Uchiha or even Shinaburame waiting for the king. Even the fox's presence didn't raise any eyebrows, as the beast usually resided near to the king most of the time. However, Naruto narrowed his eyes when he spotted a stunningly beautiful red-headed woman waiting for him. She was older than him by a few years, probably around Hashirama's age. Her skin was even paler than his own, and her stark blue eyes were staring at him intensely. Her posture indicated pride, surprise and respect, but also fear, desperation and nervousness. The same could be said about the handful redheads, including a little girl of 9 standing around the woman protectively. Before he could even speak, he was surprised when a golden blur passed from his side. He could not help but blink when Tsunade, who had just charged into the tent, went straight for the redhead woman and embraced her fiercely. Confused, the king looked at his supporters and saw Hashirama gesture to the redhead, who gave a short bow to him. "This is Mito Uzumaki, my king." Daughter of Lord Ayato Uzumaki, heiress of the nation of Yuzu, introduced Hashirama, and was there a hint of admiration in the man's voice? Naruto was not in a good mood right now after his spat with Tsunade. He was still worried as to what she would do now that the truth was known to her, and meeting in Uzumaki was not on his agenda right now. Certainly not when the stubborn redheads had ignored his proposal to join the ninja kingdom. He had even offered them quite a few lands in the Land of Lightning once it was secured, and also proposed to let them rule Yuzu but ultimately be answerable to him. And they had ignored that offer, continuing their never-ending slight of the Uchiha. King Naruto greeted Mito respectfully. "What business does an Uzumaki heiress have here? If I remember correctly, I sent your people an offer to join the New World. Your father spat at my offer," said Naruto frostily. Maybe it was his anger and frustration with Tsunade's reaction or the insult Ayato Uzumaki had shown him. He was not in a good mood and Mito Uzumaki was going to bear the brunt of it for her poor timing. The woman flinched at his harsh tone, but before Naruto could rebuke her further he was silenced by Tsunade's stern glare. "You will speak to her respectfully, my king. If we are all guilty for the crimes of our fathers, then we all ought to be executed," warned Tsunade icily. Nearly everyone in the tent flinched at the rebuke and Hashirama was taken aback by his sister's changed attitude towards her husband. His ability to sense emotions already pointed barely restrained anger, hurt and pain burning in both Naruto and Tsunade's hearts. More so in Tsunade's case, he didn't know what happened, but he knew he had to intervene. "My king, my grandmother was an Uzumaki. The Senju share ties of blood with their clan, so do the Uchiha through our common ancestor," said Hashirama honestly. "We are kin. Uchiha and Uzumaki." It was the little girl who spoke those words and surprised the king. His anger momentarily forgotten as he stared at the proud and defiant child. Mito tensed when the king approached forward and knelt before the girl. "What's your name?" asked Naruto curiously, making the girl lift her shoulders proudly. "Kushina Uzumaki. Daughter of Nagato Uzumaki, heiress of Yuzu," introduced the girl. "Do you know who I am?" asked Naruto with a smile, making her nod eagerly. "Dragon King." "They say you ride upon a giant fox," said Kushina gleefully, as she stared at the fox sleeping in the corner who on hearing her words snorted much to everyone's shock. Tsunade and everyone else tensed at the blatant insult but were surprised when Naruto rolled his eyes at the gesture. "I do ride upon that lazy fox once I managed to get his fat ass off the ground," said Naruto playfully, and grinned when he saw Kurama growl at him. Kushina laughed on hearing that and she pointed a finger at the grumbling Biju. "He's cute." "I am the Kyuubi, stupid brat." "I am not cute," roared Kurama in fury. "And Fluffy," said Kushina bravely. "I am not Fluffy," yelled Kurama in disbelief, nearly making everyone deaf and sending half the camp in a frenzy. "Oh, shut up. Getting riled up by a little girl? You're getting soft," chided Naruto, earning a series of grumbling and curses from the Biju before it went back to sulking in a corner. Naruto's anger had mostly faded thanks to the interesting child before him. She was a fierce one, not many including the likes of Hashirama dared to irritate Kurama. He glanced at Tsunade only to see an unreadable expression on her face as she watched him and Kushina together. He was brought out of his thoughts when Kushina again decided to make herself heard. "My people are dying. We need help," said the child hesitantly, worry and fear clearly visible in her purple eyes. Naruto frowned at the claim and looked at Mito Uzumaki questioningly. The older woman gestured to her guards and they hesitantly obeyed her command. Kushina soon found herself being escorted out of the tent by her clansmen. The child tried to protest, but one glance from Mito silenced all her protests. When they were gone, Naruto stared at Mito seriously. "What does she mean?" Mito sighed but was relieved when Naruto gestured for everyone to take a seat. They were all reluctant to do so when the king himself remained standing, but when he insisted, they could not disobey. Only his newly formed Kingsguard stood alongside him. Mito had heard these four boys were childhood friends of the king and were fierce warriors themselves. The presence of Shisui Uchiha, the Morning Star and his famed sword fury was enough to dissuade any hostile thoughts from arising in her mind. Not that they ever had. Nearly 6 months ago, our patrols across our sea borders spotted ships. While they did not cross into our lands, these unknown parties often used to stay near the border longer than any merchant vessels ever did. We know for a fact that the mountain clans from the Land of Lightning do not have any kind of fleet and imagine them to be a new nation trying to probe our defenses. Not taking the threat lightly, my father called for additional aid from the fire daimyo who promised him not just his forces but also those of the Uchiha and Senju, explained Mito briefly. That went well for him, said Naruto sarcastically, making Mito grimace as she was again reminded of the coup this young boy had staged. It still surprised her that someone noble like Hashirama could agree to such a thing, but then again the man was a shinobi and treachery was not something unusual to them. It was only after news of the daimyo's defeat reached us did we come under attack. Whole patrols started disappearing, our forward defense outposts were attacked and destroyed. We only realized the true magnitude of the threat when one of our 7 islands went silent. My father called our armies and ordered an investigation. When we reached there, as Mito faltered, Naruto could not help but feel he was not going to like what she had to say. From the corner of his eye, he saw Kurama actually rise from his sleep and pay rapt attention to Uzumaki. "What did you find there?" asked Tsunade gently. Mito was a friend of hers and even distant cousin if she tried to connect their family ties. Quite a few years of her childhood were spent in visiting Yuzu, and there she had befriended Mito, Nagato, and their brother Nihiro. The whole island was deserted. Not a soul was present inside the city. It was as if they all vanished. There were no bodies, but only rivers of blood. A massacre happened there, but no evidence was left for our army to investigate further. We soon realized we had made a mistake by taking our entire force to one place, as within the next few days we got word that 3 more of our islands were attacked. We rushed to their defense with haste, but found similar results everywhere, said Mito gravely, her despair clearly visible in her blue eyes. "Who did this?" asked Hashirama furiously. He might have did his allies injustice by not rushing to their aid immediately, but if they were facing such a grave threat, then it was his duty to help them. Realizing the gravity of the threat, my father ordered our forces to defend our capital Yuzu and our remaining 2 islands. It was not long before we encountered the enemy for the first time, and we knew what happened to our people. "They all came back," said Mito hesitantly. "But you just said they were all massacred," pointed Shinaburame confusedly, earning a haunted look from the Uzumaki woman. "I never said they came back alive." Naruto stiffened as memories of his dark dreams came haunting back in his heart. The tent erupted in panic and disbelief, with questions being thrown at Mito along with accusations of lies, but everyone was silenced when Kurama himself approached the Uzumaki. Mito gulped on seeing a smaller form of the strongest Biju of the world so close to her. This beast was capable of destroying entire nations, and right now it was staring at her intensely. "Explain everything," commanded Kurama, much to everyone's surprise. "It was our own people who attacked us." "But they were not our people anymore. They never spoke. They never listened as we pleaded them to stop this madness. They attacked our soldiers like animals, not caring if they were struck down. Even when our ninjas severed their vital organs, they still kept coming. We soon realized those men and women, even children, were already dead. It was as if their dead bodies were being controlled like puppets by someone hiding in the shadows," explained Mito gravely. "Could it be fighters from the land of wind?" "Their people are well versed in the art of puppetry," suggested Itachi. "Maybe. But no puppet master can control thousands of dead corpses. They certainly cannot attack and silence entire islands without alerting the Uzumaki defenders," countered Kagami worriedly. "Lady Mito, did your fighters ever see the one behind this madness?" questioned Shisui. "Not up close. But we did see a few shadows at the back of our turned people. There were also strange inhuman creatures that were as pale as snow from head to toe, but they were all waiting in the back and content with watching our own turned people destroy us. We lost both our islands and had to retreat to Yuzu. My brother Nihiro was killed when our last island was lost," revealed Mito sadly. Tsunade's eyes widened, and without hesitation her hand reached up to clasp Mito's. The Uzumaki woman gave her a strained but thankful smile before looking at the king and the fox, who were both very pale. The fox looked ready to piss himself, which did not reassure Mito in the slightest. "Did you see any banners?" asked Kurama hesitantly. "My brother Nihiro reported one before he was killed. He said he saw a banner of a great tree with 10 long branches, but never before has such a banner been seen anywhere," answered Mito confusedly. Naruto was alarmed when Kurama roared so furiously that it nearly caused a minor earthquake. Instantly he walked towards his friend even as others scrambled away from the out-of-control Biju. He knelt before the fox and placed a comforting hand on his neck. The familiar connection was established that allowed them to talk to each other without any words. "Tell me," commanded Naruto, and watched the despair and fear in Kurama's eyes, which unnerved him greatly. "That banner only belonged to one person," said Kurama hesitantly. "Who?" demanded Naruto worriedly. "Kaguya Otsutsuki." Naruto's heart skipped a beat on hearing the name of that dreaded woman be mentioned again. He remembered Kurama's terrifying tale of the First War for Dawn and how Kaguya nearly destroyed the world if she had not been stopped by her sons. "You said she was defeated." "She's dead," countered Naruto fiercely. Thousands of years had already passed since Kaguya's fall, and while some of her supporters still existed till this day, he doubted they could ever be capable of something like this. "I know. But it does not change the fact that someone has raised her banner again." The reason I was tasked by the sage to watch over the Uchiha was the fact that the third tainted son of Kagaya corrupted your ancestor Indra and made him nearly awaken the Jubi in hopes of reviving Kagaya's trapped soul. While we managed to stop Indra averting another disaster, the sage wanted any further attempts to corrupt the Uchiha to be stopped by any means. It was why he entrusted me, the strongest of his creation, with this task while my other brothers and sisters maintained peace across the world, explained Kurama. How grave is this threat? I cannot fight a war on 3 fronts. My forces are already engaged against the Land of Wind, the Samurai Nation, and they outnumber us. If I send aid to Yuzu, I only further weaken my army. I cannot take this risk, certainly not now that Tsunade knows the truth about Shizuka, argued Naruto fiercely. You told her, asked Kurama in disbelief, this couldn't have happened at a worse time? It might just destroy the alliance they had formed so painfully. But it was done and there was no going back now. Even so, Naruto needed to know the truth. You need to send aid to Yuzu and investigate the truth. The Uzumaki are a strong and ancient clan. If you ever want their allegiance, then aid them in their hour of need. If these are truly Kagaya's supporters, then I fear it is not possible for us to defend Yuzu without great losses. I suggest you get as many of them to safety before their islands are overrun, warned Kurama. This could all be a ploy, Kurama. We are talking about a woman that has been dead for thousands of years, exclaimed Naruto, and flinched when the beast glared at him. It is your choice, King Naruto. The beast gave that last piece of advice just as Mito came before Naruto and bent her knee. The importance of that gesture was not lost to Naruto, for the Uzumaki were an extremely proud clan. For their heiress to kneel before him could only mean Ayato Uzumaki was desperate and was even willing to swear fealty to Naruto. You have every reason to deny any help to my people, King Naruto. My ancestors have not been kind or even cordial to the Uchiha, and for that I ask your forgiveness. But my people are dying by the thousands, one of my brothers is already dead and more will follow. My father has agreed to swear fealty to you and accept you as our king. He only gave me one message to say to you, said Mito sincerely. The redhead looked at the young king and saw a series of conflicted emotions present in his eyes. Yuzushiogakure calls for aid. Tsunade and everyone else watched nervously as Naruto clenched his fists. Whatever their personal opinions regarding the Uzumaki situation, Naruto was their king and his word would be final and might just decide the fate of the Uzumaki. Naruto was already fighting a war on 2 fronts and his enemies outnumbered his forces greatly. The bitter fact was that he had no troops to spare even if he wanted to. Now, he also had to deal with the fact that Tsunade knew his darkest secret and his allies might turn on him any moment when they discovered the deception. In front of his eyes, everything was falling apart and he was helpless to stop it. 3 choices. Shizuka's dark prophecy rang true in his heart, and deep down he knew this was the second one. When he made his first choice, it ended a never-ending war and brought peace after thousands of years. What consequences would the second one have? Naori Uchiha watched her nephew close his eyes and take a deep breath. When he opened them again, he looked straight at Mito with clear determination in his eyes. And the Land of Fire shall answer. Stunned silence prevailed across the tent as the magnitude of that decision washed over every person. Kurama could not help but smile in relief when Naruto turned towards his most trusted friend. Muster the Kingsguard force by evening, same goes for the naval fleet. I want as many ninjas and sailors you can summon, I shall lead them personally to Yuzu, declared Naruto. My king, it gladdens me to hear that you have decided to aid our allies. But you need not burden yourself, I can lead this force while you lead our army to victory against the Samurai Nation, suggested Hashirama, but Naruto shook his head. No, Lord Senju. What kind of a king will I be if I let others defend my own people? No, you shall maintain command over 15,000 of our warriors, and with the help of the fox you shall defeat the Samurai Nation, ordered Naruto, surprising both the Senju head and the Biju. What? Exclaimed Kurama fiercely. If my army loses here, then it will all be for nothing. Help them defeat the Samurai Nation while I aid the Uzumaki. We'll repel the invaders by combining my 7,000 elite troops with the Uzumaki fighters. If everything fails, I'll use our ships to save as many Uzumaki as I can and give them refuge in my own nation, declared Naruto, his iron voice leaving no room for protest from anyone, including Kurama. A part of Kurama wanted nothing more but to go with Naruto, but the rational side of him knew it was important for Naruto to defeat the Samurai Nation. He was already taking a considerable sum of his forces, including many elite warriors, to help the Uzumaki and needed Kurama to aid Hashirama to defeat their enemies here. If this threat was truly what Kurama feared it was, then it only became more important to unite every fighter of the world. The only way to do that with haste was through force until everyone saw the true threat with their very own eyes. But if they waited for that to happen, then it would be too late. The fox watched as Shisui and his sworn brothers rushed out to carry out Naruto's commands. The king then instructed Shinaburame to accompany him to Yuzu along with 3 civilian generals, Itama Senju and Naori Uchiha as well. Mito could only watch in stunned silence as everyone rushed to obey the young king. She would have liked if he had brought his entire force and the Biju to Yuzu's aid, but knew it was not possible. Even so, the king himself was marching to their aid, bringing the elite of his army to the fight, including the likes of Naori Uchiha and his dangerous friends. Surprisingly, Tsunade was ordered to stay back, much to the blonde's shock. When she approached her husband, the fierce glare in his eyes could barely contain the sea of anger burning in his heart. "Why?" she asked. "I made a mistake and I am sorry for that, but you know I only had the best intentions for everyone in my heart when I made that choice. You chose to want some space, I am only following your own request," said Naruto bitterly. But dash. She stopped on noticing the sadness and disappointment in his eyes. Despite all that had happened between them, she could not let him go out there like that. "Not alone. You cannot make every decision in this marriage, Tsunade." His words hurt and she fought back a grimace. With one last glance, he walked away. Naruto watched thousands of his elite ninjas march in discipline towards the royal fleet that shall take them to Uzushiogakure to face an unknown enemy that had already brought a clan like the Uzumaki to their knees. Mito Uzumaki and all of her clansmen except for Kushina would be accompanying the king's force back to their homeland. Kushina had tried to protest but had to relent when Mito ordered her to stay here. Thankfully, Tsunade agreed to watch over the girl personally. Both women knew that if all was lost, then at least this way one of Yuzu's future heiress would survive. Shinaburame and the civilian generals were making sure the arms and supplies were being loaded onto the ships carefully, while Shisui, Itachi, Kagami and Takashi guided the fighters. Naruto gave a respectful nod to Hashirama and Kurama, who both sent him a firm gaze promising nothing but victory against the samurai nation. His eyes then fell upon his wife, who was holding a moist-eyed Kushina in her grasp. There were many things he wanted to say to Tsunade, and she likely had the same thoughts, but a wall had developed between them, and at the very least, they needed time to accept the change in their life. This new campaign might just give them that opportunity. Watching the 3-headed dragon banners being unfurled across every ship made Naruto realize the true gravity of the situation. So, on the lands of Uzushiogakure, the doom of our world might be unleashed. He was brought out of his own thoughts when Naori placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Knowing that she was coming with him along with Itama Senju and his friends gave him hope. The 3 of them looked ahead when the commander of the Kingsguard unleashed his sword from the top of the flagship, Hashimon. Naruto could not help but smile on seeing his best friend wielding fury and look at the thousands of ninjas boarding the ships who were all staring back at him. Shisui's voice was loud and commanding as he declared, "Warriors of Kingsguard, now is the time. Oaths you have taken, now fulfill them all. For UZU. For the king." That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.